The day I got the call informing me that I would be accepted for the new ranger post was the best day of my life. I had always had a fondness for the outdoors. I'm more of an introvert than I am an extrovert, so give me the vast forests and dense woodlands over the hustle and bustle of a busy city any day of the week. But the image that I had in my head of a new life as a USFS Ranger is very different to what I have encountered out here. I've decided to type up my experiences up until now, because I'm currently 6 days into a 3-month post in a fire watchtower, and already things have gotten, well, disturbing to say the least. I've decided to make a diary of what I've encountered and experienced, mainly for 2 reasons. 1, so I have something to keep my mind occupied on these quiet, dark nights in my tower. 2, in case for whatever reason something happens to me, then I want people to know what happened. I sound like a rattled, paranoid rookie, right? Like maybe the creepy sounds that the forest make at night in the constant isolation has already taken over my mind and pushed me one step closer to insanity. Well, maybe that is the case. Or maybe it's because something really weird is happening in these woods. I've heard some pretty messed up things in my brief time out here, but having recently found myself in this tower, I've come across something that has made everything I've heard and seen that exceptionally more disturbing. But hey, listen to what I've encountered up until now and you can be the judge. As it stands, I'm a ranger stationed in one of the largest forests in the northwest portion of America. Like I'm talking miles and miles of dense woodland, managed by the Forestry Service and more specifically, a handful of ranger district offices, one of which is where I'm stationed at. I mainly work the trails, making sure that no hikers or campers need assistance, but I also have taken part in a search and rescue op, and like I said, I'm currently assigned to a watchtower for 3 months, while the FS recruits a more permanent ranger for the role. As for my name, you can call me David, and I'm 28 years old. The day I arrived in town where the ranger's office was, I booked myself a motel, a dainty budget-looking place that look was in keeping with the town's gritty yet rustic aesthetic. It was a cold, late autumn morning when I had arrived. It was below 2 degrees and a misty low fog had engulfed the quiet town. My induction was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning at the office. I would then have the weekend to get acquainted with the surrounding area, and I would be picked up in a minibus on Monday morning at 6 a.m. and be taken to a 1-week retreat at a large national park where I would receive my basic ranger training. I handed my driver's license and $100 to the elderly man behind the motel's front desk. He asked in what I felt was a forced, friendly tone, what brought me to these parts. I informed him with a mirrored tone that I was here on business, that I had been accepted for a job and was scheduled for a meeting at the head office of the local national park, before heading out of town to a retreat at another forest location for basic training, so I would only need the room for a couple of days. His face seemed to drop just slightly before he said something that I found rather disconcerting. He said, "Another one, huh?" I looked up sharply from putting my wallet back in my pocket and I faced the man with a confused look on my face. I asked him what he meant. "It seems like every 3 months I get some chirpy young man such as yourself coming in here telling me that he needs a room because he's going to be working up in those woods." He responds with an insinuating expression on his face as he places my money in the till and hands me my room key. I put it down to the fact that the local Forestry Service were just heavily recruiting for the up-and-coming season. I thanked the man for the key and I asked him for the Wi-Fi code. The lack of a worded answer and a simple shrug of his shoulders hammered home the fact that I was a long ways away from Long Island. I entered my room, placed my case on the bed, and decided to have a drive into town to get some much-needed food. As I drove through the rural, unincorporated town, I kept my eyes out for a cafe or a restaurant. On one side of the road were local businesses, mainly camping supplies and bait shops with the odd grocery store thrown in. I decided to pull over and grab some new hiking boots. Mine had seen better days and I wanted to make a good impression at my induction tomorrow. I pulled the car over to the side and I hopped out. As I made my way up the front steps of the stores, I caught a glimpse of a small notice board on the porch window. The handyman left cards, homeowners advertised rooms for rent, and so on. But what caught my eye just before I had entered the store were the 3 missing person posters. I took a quick step back and did a double take. I examined the posters. 3 late teens. They looked like college kids, to be honest. 2 guys and a girl. Apparently being missing for the last 5 weeks after they were last seen heading off into the woods on a weekend camping trip. A bear attack, most likely, I thought to myself. Yeah, that's it. I walked into the camping store and found a pair of thick black hiking boots that were fit for purpose, and I took them to the counter. There was a large, mid-aged man sporting denim overalls and a red and white baseball cap. The potato chips that he was munching on as he watched a sports game on a handheld TV were gathering in his unkempt beard. I had to clear my throat a few times just to get him to serve me, and even then he had one eye on the game as he rang up my boots and I made small talk. So, they found those kids yet? I asked. Nah, nor any of the others, he answered, still concentrating on the game. Sorry, the others? I probed. People go missing all the time in these woods, ain't nothing new. A lot of forest out there after all. He responded dismissively. What, and they're never found alive? Or never found at all? I asked, disconcerted. The ones they find usually explains where they went. A bear attack, mountain lion exposure, but the rest? Nah, if they don't find him within a week, they don't find him at all. Lots of folk around here say it's a copycat killer, but I don't listen to none of that. The man replied as he bagged up my boots and handed me my purchase. A copycat killer? I asked, confused. The man scoffed at me. You ain't from around these parts, are you, kid? He asked with a smile, like my answer just told him everything about me. I just shook my head with a dumbfounded look on my face. The man chuckled, getting out of his seat and walking to the other side of the counter as he spoke. 1963 was the year. George Munson was the name, he exclaimed, picking up a picture frame off the wall. Inside was a newspaper clipping. He slid it across the counter to me and I examined it. The headline read, Monster Munson sentenced to death, with a small caption underneath explained that he had been found guilty for the deaths of 5 children. Yep, Georgie was the local oddball, or so my daddy told me, he said as I looked into the eyes on the mugshot of a man in his early 20s. He was one of those people who may have aged physically, but he stopped aging around 10 to be honest. Special needs and all that. His mama would take him up into the woods on hikes and stuff. One day his mama comes running back into town wailing, saying Georgie had been taken by somebody in the woods. The man told me. So what happened? I asked curiously, wondering how the story the man was telling me had led to the article in front of me. Well, the townspeople along with the rangers went looking in those here woods. 5 weeks and not a trace of him. He leans in closer. Then all of a sudden, boom, the kid just comes wading out of the forest like nothing ever happened. He informed me with an incredulous look on his face. You're kidding. Straight up. Anyways, Georgie's mama was elated to have her little boy back. Well, I say little boy, kid was about 6'5", a big son of a gun. Yeah, but what about the murders? I snapped, impatiently interrupting the man as he began to digress. Oh, well, from the way my daddy told it, young Georgie was somewhat withdrawn after he came home. He didn't speak, he didn't eat. His mama invited a group of kids from the neighborhood over one day. They were younger in Georgia, but given his limitations, She felt that they would have played well together. The man's expression turned from playfully animated to haunted and vacant. Georgie's mama was speaking with her neighbor when the group of kids in Georgie went missing, he stated. Missing? I pressed. Yep. Few of the townsfolk witnessed Georgie leading those kids into the woods. It looked like they were having fun singing nursery rhymes, skipping along. Just kids doing stuff. But thing is, those fun-having kids, they never made it home. He informed me gravely. What happened to them? I dared to ask. The man leaned in closer than he had throughout the whole exchange. A search party went looking, found them all mangled and butchered. Absolutely unspeakable acts of evil inflicted upon them. There's rumors that some of the search and rescue vets threw up when they found what was left of those kids. But 6 people went into those woods that day, and they only found 5 bodies. Georgie was still missing. Where was he? I asked curiously. Well, no one knew, until the day that big Georgie Munson just walked out of those woods again, covered head to toe in the blood of those kids. The man's brow was high, letting the weight of his words hang in the air for a few seconds. So, did he say why he did it? I asked, rather befuddled. Well, that's the thing. He said he didn't. I mean, the kid was 2 bananas short of a full bunch. I don't really know if he knew how much trouble he was in, but my daddy said his mama would be screaming at folks in the street claiming her boy didn't do this. And you know what the weird thing is? The man leaned close as if making sure that no one could hear, despite the store being empty. I leaned in too, gesturing for him to drop the punchline. And during those police interviews, Georgie claimed that he never came back from the woods the first time. The man revealed, slapping his hand on the counter as an exclamation point. Weird, huh? Indeed, I muttered. But, of course he was gonna say that. Kid was facing the death penalty. Heck, it makes for a good story around the fire though. Enjoy your camping. Best advice, stick to the trails. The man suggests with a friendly smile. I chuckled. Well, actually, I'll be working as a ranger in the forest, I responded joyfully. The man's face dropped, before awkwardly clearing his throat and wishing me a good day. We never made eye contact again after that. The man went back to his sports game and I left the store. As I dropped my weight into the driver's seat of my car and let out an anxious sigh, I started the engine and I pulled off the curb, heading deeper into the town in search of a meal. The meek-looking village had a dull and gray feel to it as the late and cold autumn had well and truly set in. I spotted a potential source of food on the corner of the crossroads, and when I drove up to the front and read Rose's Diner on the front of the building, I couldn't have exited the car quick enough. I jogged up the steps, opened up the door, and took a seat in a booth. A waitress who, in my humble opinion, should have retired a good 6 years ago came over to take my order. "What'll it be, hon?" she asked in a strong and horsey accent. A big smoker, judging by her smile and the current state of her vocal cords. Can I get pancakes and, a side order of bacon too?" "Coffee?" "Sure, thank you." I closed my menu and handed it to the waitress. As she poured the coffee into my mug, she looked me up and down. "You, new in town?" she asked curiously, having not recognized me in what was a low-populated town. "Yes, ma'am, I'm gonna be I hesitated, worrying that my honest answer would have the same effect as it did on the store owner. "Fishing, yeah, I'm gonna be fishing in the lake. Came all the way from Long Island for this trip. Heard a lot about this place," I remarked, putting enthusiasm into my answer. The waitress seemed upbeat. "Oh, well, all good, I hope. I done lived here my whole darn life. Opened up this diner in '84 after my daddy died and left me some money. I'm Rose," she revealed, pointing at the Rose's Diner badge woven into the uniform. "Oh, I see. Well, it's a lovely establishment that you have here. I'm David," I assured, a little more genuine this time. "Oh, well, just wait until you try the pancakes," she bantered as she finished writing down my order and heading off into the kitchen. I warmed my hands on the hot cup and turned to look at the wonderful scenery on the other side of the window glass. I stared over the rooftops of the town and into the fields and hills, admiring how the vast mass of trees and woodland simply seemed to take over the earth and completely smothered the mountains. I smiled, knowing that was where I belonged. My gaze dropped back to the street as I saw a mother pushing her 2 twins in a stroller. As she passed, I noticed 2 of the 8-strong collection of telegraph poles and streetlights had paper attached to them. Upon a squint of my eyes, I made out one word in red: missing. I couldn't make out the images below the word missing, but I could see enough to know one thing. They were the same people in the posters that were outside the equipment store. In fact, they were both male and were much, much younger. The sound of a plate hitting the table in front of me snapped me out of my daze, and I turned to see Rose dishing out my food. "1 order of pancakes with a side of bacon, and here's your syrup. Can I get you anything else?" Rose asked as she topped off my mug. No, that'll be fine, thank you," I assured her. She smiles and wishes me a nice meal and turns to go back to the kitchen. "Hey, Rose," I whispered at her, grabbing her attention. She turned back to face me, tilting her head back. "Yes, hon." "Say, I'm a bit of a sucker for the paranormal. I love going on ghost hunts and the like. Not many places with the history and lore back home, but come on. You lived around here all your life. I've heard a few urban legends, but come on. What's the stories around here?" I asked with an encouraging tone and a cheeky smile. "Oh, honey, if you like that spooky stuff, then you come to the right place," she claims with a chuckle. Go on, I heard the story about Charlie Munson, was it?" "Oh, you mean Georgie Munson, honey," she corrected me with a smile. "Yeah, a lot of folks around here to this day say Georgie didn't kill those youngins. They say that it was one of those doppelgangers, but believe me when I say that local legend's small fry. You ever heard of the Black Elk Witch? Or all the legends of the Blood Moon cult that live up in the mountains?" she asked, leaning in and resting her elbows on the edge of the table. "No, I haven't heard of those." "Well, a long time ago, back when my daddy was younger than you, there was a woman, her name was Elizabeth Wells, lived around here in the 1910s. Complete hermit and a total whack job. Devil worshiping, witchcraft, you name it. Well, at 45, after the town got sick of her, she was banished and she went to live in a house in the middle of the woods. People paid her no mind after that until one day, after 15 years, she comes back into the village totally naked, as well as filthy, haggard, and hairy. People are shocked and disgusted. Stands on the steps of the church and proceeds to cast a curse over the town. Once again, she's chased back into the forest and up into the mountains, like an animal. 5 years go by with no more sightings of Mrs. Wells. People assume she died of starvation or something. But that was until suddenly, all the townspeople's kids started going missing, one by one. After 5 years and none of the kids ever being found, the townspeople's head up into the woods to find Miss Wells after assuming that she was the culprit. They find her house and scream for her to come out. She claims her innocence out of the upstairs window and the townspeople start to believe her. That was until one of the townsfolk spots one of their missing kids' shoes in the leaves near their porch. That was all they needed to know. They kicked her door, but it doesn't open, so they break her window and start pouring gasoline into her house. One of them lights a match and woof. Her hand gestures imitate a large flame exploding into the air. Jesus, what happened to her? I asked with curiosity. Legend goes they heard her wailing in the house, screeching and squealing as the flames torched her body. The town sheriff was one of the parents of the missing kids. He covered up the attack as an accidental fire. They searched the house and found the basement had been relatively unharmed. There was evidence that Mrs. Wells had been keeping the kids in the basement. She had done terrible things to them in some sort of ritualistic act. There was witchcraft paraphernalia, occult symbols, and also bloody prints all over the place, as well as signs that she had been eating the remains. Sheriff conspired with the fire department to chalk the fire up to the flames that she had used to cook the bodies, spilling out onto the wood floor of the house. I guess it was a different time back then. None of those forensic types to say any different. She said with a shrug of her shoulders. "Good God, that's terrible," I said. "Yeah, they tore the place down a year after her death. But then 10 years after the fire, there was this hiker called Justin Moffat, who ventured up into those woods and wandered off the trail. He was never seen again, and people began to say that he wandered too close to the Wells house, and the ghost of Elizabeth Wells had killed him, just like she had killed the youngins." After the investigation was closed, there was a group of 3 who went searching for Justin by themselves. They went missing too. So now the story of the Black Elk Witch is one of those stories the townsfolk tell their kids. So they do as they're told and go wandering off alone. Don't talk to strangers and go to bed on time. You get the idea. "So, the story is a myth?" I asked, confused and desperate for clarification. "Well, my daddy was born after the fire when it all happened. But he said his daddy and daddy before him swore Elizabeth Wells did those things to those kids and that she was killing the hikers. But like I said, could be just a scary story to keep the kids in line. It certainly did me." Rose remarked with a giddy chuckle. I wasn't so amused, but I tried not to show it. Yeah, and you mentioned a cult too," I asked apprehensively. "Oh, yeah. Now, I can't speak it to myself, but there were a lot of stories people used to talk about. In the late 60s, people would talk about a group of people who worshiped the same dark forces that Elizabeth Wells did. Say they went to live out in the deep back forest up in the mountains. They say they're out there still, lurking and stalking lost hikers to use in their rituals and sacrifices to the Black Elk Witch." Her words hung heavy in the air as she made intense eye contact with me for a few seconds, but slapping my shoulder and bursting into laughter. "Oh, don't worry, darling, it's just some spooky tales that people like to tell. No one's ever seen the so-called cult. It's just another spooky tale to bring up in paranormal enthusiasts such as yourself. Enjoy your meal now before it gets cold." And with that, she departed, leaving me with my thoughts and my pancakes. Thankfully, the food was delicious, and I left a nice tip for Rose and gave her a friendly wave as I left. Hopefully, I would see her again. As I headed to my car, I took a detour to examine the posters that I had seen earlier. The first one was a young boy named Dennis Weaver, age 13, last seen on a hiking trip with their family. Parents woke up in the morning to find him not at his tent. The poster was dated 5 weeks ago. I took a photo on my phone and headed down to the other and did the same. I headed back to my motel where I called my cell provider and purchased an internet add-on for my package. I pulled my laptop out and began to search the web. I typed in the name of the town that I was in and added the keyword missing persons. I was perplexed when I saw nothing of the sort coming up on my web search. I typed in Dennis Weaver and the town's name and I hit search. Nothing. I went on my phone and pulled up the picture of the other missing poster. I looked at it, another young boy. This one probably around 15. Chad Mitchell, another one who had gone on a hike with some friends. He had stepped off the trail in the night, likely to take a leak, I presumed. He's never been seen since. I typed his name into the search bar and once again, I was puzzled to see no articles about his disappearance either. For whatever reason, it seemed like the town was trying to keep the investigations in-house. Why, I had no idea. I decided to do one last search. I typed in Elizabeth Wells and the town's name into the bar and I hit enter. The top article caught my eye. It was nothing more than a sort of urban legend wiki, but the title was The Black Elk Witch. I clicked on it. A horrific sketch was the main image that sat below the title. It was of Elizabeth Wells, aka the so-called Black Elk Witch. Her hair was so wild and unkempt, I couldn't help but compare her to Medusa. Her limbs were stretched out in a crucifix position. She was drawn without clothing but shaded in places to represent the muck and hair on her body. On her back were what seemed to be rags that resembled a type of cape. Her face was drawn with zero beauty, bordering on contorted into anger and deformed in malice, as these sketches of flames danced on her flesh. A chill ran down my spine, as the crude pencil dots for pupils seemed to stare right into my soul. I read the article and realized the story fit the exact rendition that Rose had given, although there were a few different versions, one of which she had drowned in the lake by the townspeople and the other where they had nailed her to a crucifix and tied it to a tree, leaving her out in the winter to freeze. But other than those variants, the story remained the same. I closed the laptop, deciding that I needed a good night's sleep and didn't fancy waking up in a cold sweat. The next day, I headed to the district office for Forestry service, prepared to meet my employers and coworkers for the first time in person. I stepped into the office and gave my name to the ranger on the front desk. I gave my name and she quickly informed me that the head ranger was waiting for me in his office. I went through and knocked on the door that I was directed to. "Come in," a commanding voice yelled through the wood. I obeyed and entered the room. Behind a desk, filling out some paperwork, was a stern-looking man. I could tell from his salt and pepper stubble and his no-nonsense haircut that he had some sort of military background. "Hi, I'm Dave," I said, extending my hand. "Dave, pleased to meet you," the man said, grabbing my hand firmly and shaking it. "Bill." "Nice to meet you, Bill." "Nice to have another New Yorker around here, to be quite honest. Some of these guys are so northeast that they make me sound like Tony Soprano, you know," he said with a soft chuckle. We shared a laugh and I immediately felt more at ease. "So, that office liked you the best out of all the video interviews?" "No, David, I'm gonna be honest. Picking recruits isn't really my purview, but training them and weeding them out definitely is. You understand me?" he asked, an intimidating stare piercing my soul. "I hear you, sir, loud and clear," I assured him, trying to stay firm. A tense silence hung in the air for a brief moment, while he assessed my demeanor a little further. You seem like a good kid, David. Just follow your training and do as I tell you and you'll make a good addition to the team," he said, fumbling in his desk drawer, and he pulled out a stack of papers. "Here's your starter pack and contract, plus information on the training retreat that you're heading to Monday. Sign where the X's are," he instructed, as he slid the papers across and handed me a pen. I filled in the paperwork as Bill observed me some more. "Hey, can I ask you a question?" I asked cautiously. "Shoot." "Do you all get many missing persons around here?" Bill scoffed. "It's the woods, kid. There are mountain lions, bears, wolves. We try to tell everybody to stick to the trails, but a lot of people think they know better, you know." "What's the matter, kid? Heard you having doubts? You think the big bad wolves are gonna get you out there?" He poked questions at me teasingly, until suddenly he narrowed his eyes and looked at me with a little more suspicion. "Unless somebody's been getting in your head, who you been talking to?" he demanded to know. His switch in attitude caught me off guard. I fumbled an answer. "What? No one. I mean, I went into town yesterday and I saw a lot of the posters up. Just seems like a lot of them for such a small community." I responded in a desperate, apologetic tone. Bill seemed to relax. "Well, you know these small town types always think they know the woods better than us. The sheriff's department is made up of 2 on-call guys. They don't know what it's like to listen to authority and order. They do what they want and don't listen to our advice. And then, when the crap hits the proverbial fan and they get eaten by a freaking Yogi and his pals, people might want to make up some boogeyman stories, but it's just the woods, kid. It's a dangerous place. And that's why the government made the DAFs, but people still think they know better and they always will. So yeah, to answer your question, we get a lot of missing people. Don't worry though, as a part of your basic training, you'll be shown search and rescue techniques. Well great, I can't wait, I exclaimed, feeling a little better about Bill's explanation. So young and so full of optimism. You remind me of myself, 30 years ago, Bill said with a sorrowful chuckle. I smiled and handed him these signed forms. I was officially a forest ranger. Bus will be here Monday. Be here at 5:30. It's leaving at 6. You should be in Denver by 2. Training starts Tuesday morning. You'll be back here Friday night. By then, we should have your accommodation arranged, so you can pick the keys up when you're back. It's been a pleasure, David. I look forward to working with you, Bill exclaimed, offering yet another firm handshake from his rock of a hand. I left the office and headed to Rose's for another batch of her delicious pancakes. The bus pulled up at the Rocky Mountains National Park on time, bar a few-minute delay. We exited the bus and made our way to the visitor center. The rangers that I traveled with were all fairly new, no more than a year into their positions. They had received on-site basic training, but we were all going to be taking this advanced course, which would teach us some S&R techniques, as well as fire watching and climbing training too. I had gotten to know them on the bus ride, swapping the stories from our lives up until this point. Jeff, Pete, Richard, and Daniel, all great guys. We were excited to get trained up and hear all the awesome stories from the veterans. The retreat was awesome. Team building games, trust exercises, search and rescue missions, hikes, everything. That 4 days was probably the most fun that I had had in my entire life. The best part though was sitting around the campfire at nighttime, drinking beer and swapping stories, hearing all the seniors and vets talk about their experiences as forest rangers. It blew my mind. Successful rescues, animal sightings, criminal investigations. I was enthralled. But suddenly the conversation turned to the strangest things seen when on the job. Now, none of these guys were from our jurisdiction, but nevertheless, they were unsettling to say the least. There were 3 that stood out, and I'll do my best to recount them as I remember them being told. The first was a senior ranger who worked at this park, the Rockies. He was asked what was the most haunting search and rescue mission he had worked on. This was what he said. It has to be the disappearance of this kid back in '06. I was a rookie at the time stationed at Crater Lake National Park. I was shadowing one of the seniors there. The guy taught me everything I knew. Seen it all type of guy. He's retired now, but anyway, I digress. A call came in from the VC that a family had been camping up in the hills and were making their way back down the trail to their car. At some point, they had lost sight of their youngest son. They assumed that he had just stopped to tie his laces or stepped off the trail to take a leak, but no, they couldn't find him anywhere. Dad was trying to keep a cool head while the mother was totally losing it. But when we got there, I could tell that they were both just as frantic. The dude just hit it a little better. Anyway, we get there and do a preliminary search of the nearby area, and we find nothing. I mean, no sign, no tracks. Even the dogs didn't pick up his scent. We questioned the parents, and they said that he was lagging at the back of the group due to his legs being tired. Why they didn't keep this 8-year-old where they could see him is beyond me, but we just chalked it up to complacency and tiredness. They said they looked back 1 minute and he was there, and then they looked back 20 seconds later and he wasn't. Naturally, after we didn't find him in the nearby area, The police got involved because it was a suspected abduction. But I swear to God, me and my partner, our search and rescue team, the volunteers police, we all searched for days with absolutely no sign of this kid whatsoever. We must have covered 30 miles in each direction. Obviously, after 10 days, we called the search off, much to the dismay of his parents. But there was honestly no more that we could have done. We put up posters in the visitor center and around the park with this kid's photo and what he was wearing last. He was wearing a blue winter coat. And given that would stand out against the green and brown of the forest, we highlighted this, as most likely this would be what any potential hikers would spot. If he was still wearing it, of course. But given how cold he would get at night, it was a strong possibility. Around 3 weeks after the kid went missing, we were out on patrol when we get a call from the VC saying that a hiker thinks he found the kid. So we head over to where he said he was. We get there and he's at the foot of this steep rock face that goes up around 90 feet. Like this kid is, and I kid you not, 135 miles from where he had disappeared. He points up to halfway up the rock face, and there it is, in this small cavity in the rock face. The kid's blue jacket. Now there's absolutely no way this could have gotten up there by himself. It was hard enough for me to climb up there and get him myself, and I had training and equipment. I do get up to him, and I swear to God, I nearly fainted and fell to my own death. This cavity was no more than 10 inches deep and long, no more than 3 inches wide either. The jacket's just stuffed in there. So I go to pull it out, and as I do, there's this real strong smell coming out of the hole. It smelled like rust and a strong coppery smell. I think it's something to do with the rocks and air pressure or something like that. Heck, I'm not a geologist. But no, I quickly find out what it is when I pulled that jacket out. It's the kid. I've never seen anything like it. There was no blood or torn flesh or anything around the cavity's opening, but the way that he had been stuffed in there was horrifying. The way his eye was just looking at me like a stress ball that had been squeezed, it made my blood turn to ice. The cops had to bring in specialists to chisel the rock out so that they could retrieve his body for an autopsy. My partner at the time was a drinking buddy with one of the detectives. He told me that when they got the kid out, he was messed up, like his insides had exploded out of him at both ends. Every bone in his body broken, but no superficial injuries. They said that his blood vessels had exploded and 2 whole pints of it had leaked out of his mouth, his nose, and ears. That's what the copper smell was. And as terrifying as that all is, that kid had been missing for 3 weeks. But when they got him on that table, they said that he had only been dead for a matter of hours, and they also found berries in his stomach. What was left of him anyway, and he wasn't dehydrated or malnutritional. Cause of death was recorded as exposure. Hilarious. Can you believe that? My partner asked his detective friend about the next time they went drinking, and he told him, "We've been told to not ask questions. I don't know what's going on, but I can't find anything about it online." In fact, the missing persons website had him registered as still missing. Someone wants to cover it up, but why? I don't know. Don't want to scare off visitors, I guess, but something took that boy, kept him clean, healthy, and fed and watered for 21 days. And then just stuffed him in a hole that was frankly impossible for any human or natural force to do so. With such force that his insides burst out of his mouth, but they didn't leave a scratch on him. But yeah, exposure, right? That's the one that keeps me awake at night. Us newbies, we all sat there, mouths open. I noticed how the more senior rangers didn't look as shocked. It was more a look of somber shame, like they had heard it all before. A ranger sat across from him and slapped his knee. "I think I heard about that one. Made the rounds a while back at another training retreat. But here's one that you haven't heard, trust me." We all leaned in with anticipation, and the ranger asked us all to swear that we keep this to ourselves before he began his story. We did, obviously, but he makes it abundantly clear that he can't leave the group, because he has no idea how bad it could get for him if people find out that he talked. Again, we swear to him that we won't, but even then he isn't comfortable telling us where he works or anything. But we don't push him. Now, I don't know if this is verbatim, but this is how I remember him telling it. Okay, so I'm around a year in. I'm heading back up this trail in the morning doing a check-in on a couple who are camping up there. I get about 100 yards from their camp and the dude is like, in the middle of the trail, waving me down in a panic. I pulled the ATV over and asked him what was wrong. He was like, dude, you ain't gonna believe what we found. Come look. And so I follow him back to his tent, and I can hear crying. He pulls the flap back and boom, his wife is sat there holding a baby. Now, these guys didn't have one with them yesterday, let alone a baby when I left them, so I'm baffled and ask, was she pregnant? And they tell me that it isn't theirs. They say they woke up because they had heard crying in the middle of the night, so they got up and went in to investigate. It was coming from within the tree lines though. They're going around 20 feet and they find this baby, just laid there against the foot of a tree. They tried to call the VC, but their cell phones were dead, so they were just waiting for me to come back. So I'm like, I can't take this baby back down a 5-mile trail on my ATV. So I try to radio back to the VC, but I can't reach him either. I figure it's because of the mountains close by and the heavy tree overhanging. So I tell them to keep the baby warm and safe, and I'll be back with CPS and the police. So I tear off back down to base and I call CPS from the VC. Tell them to send somebody there and then I'll meet them and help them take up the baby. They start asking me questions which I didn't consider at the time, but when she asked me, is the baby hurt, injured, or in need of urgent medical attention? No, they've just found this baby in the middle of the woods, with no other campers up that trail that day. So to say the baby is totally unharmed is a bit of a mystery. Not just unharmed either, I mean, not a single scratch on it. Like the more that I thought about it, it wasn't even dirty or anything. Like it was so bizarre, but I just told her the kid was found in the woods and that they needed to get there ASAP. They tell me that it'll be an hour before they can get somebody out to me. So one of the other rangers tells me that he'll wait there for them and urges me to go back up with some blankets and other stuff. So I point to their camp on the map and I head back up. When I get there, I park up the ATV and start heading to the camp. I expect to hear the baby crying again, but I don't, so I just assume that they finally got it to settle down. But as I get closer, I can't even hear the couple talking or anything. I pull back the tent flap and nearly scream the woods down, hand to God. This couple is just laid there, totally butchered. Like I mean torn apart, everything missing. But no sign of the baby either. That's what I was afraid of the most. Like this black bear or mountain lion is savage, this poor innocent baby. So I jump on my ATV and start heading back down the trail until I get a signal. I radio to the VC and I'm freaking out. I'm yelling at them to get animal control or fish and game or something, even the FBI. Base tells me to calm down and that the authorities are already on their way up to me, and they suggest for me to wait by the scene to make sure that nobody comes back to destroy the evidence. So I go back, but I'm just stood on the edge of the camp, refusing to go near that tent by myself. 30 minutes or so go by and my colleagues show up with the authorities. So I run over to them to guide them to the tent, but I don't see any CPS van, no animal control vehicle, and no cop car. Instead, this black Range Rover pulls up behind my ATV and these two suits get out. They head over to the tent and they put gloves on and pull back the flap. They don't flinch and they don't even say anything. They just look at each other and nod. I didn't notice it at the time, but I noticed bloody footprints leading out of the tent. The two suits turn to me and say, "That's fine, we'll take it from here. We're gonna need you to go back down to base and close off the trail." I'm confused because the infant is obviously still alive and it had wandered off somewhere. So I'm like, "Are you gonna call CPS? Are they coming?" And they just look at me. Even through their shades, I can just tell they're glaring holes in me. They're silent for a few seconds before they tell me, "They are on their way," in this robotic tone. So I do what they ask and I leave the site. And I head down the trail, telling everybody that they have to turn back or leave, because the trail isn't safe and it has to be shut down. I was at the VC when more of those black SUVs turned up and headed up there. That trail was closed for a week or so before we had an unexplained forest fire. That's what the higher-ups called it. Totally scorched that site for a 5-mile radius. Oh, and this was in the middle of October. It's never sat right with me. And the thing is, I always assumed that couple was murdered and the baby was kidnapped. So those suits who turned up were the FBI. I mean, they definitely looked the part. But I was a rookie back then. And since then, in my 10 years at that park, I've had to deal with the FBI a couple of times. During bodies dumped by killers or a fugitive hiding out in the park. And let me tell you, those suits weren't FBI. Because every Fed that I've met loves telling you that they're a Fed. And those guys didn't even tell me their names, let alone where they were from. The questions from that case are just, I don't know, many sleepless nights over that one. Anytime I asked for an update, I either just got told not to ask and to get on with my job, or I get some BS story about how a bear had attacked the man, woman, and baby but just took the infant away for its young. Even if that load of crap was true though, it still doesn't explain how the baby wound up in the woods in the first place, and it doesn't explain who these suits were either. Us rookies were all leaning back with wide eyes as we rubbed our knees. We exhaled with anxiety as the story made the hairs on our necks stand up. Some of the others started to talk about David Paulides and how a lot of what he talks about resonates with them. How there are so many mysteries when it comes to disappearances in the woods, but the parks and forests do their level best to make sure that nobody finds out the truth. We all venture it's likely so visitors keep coming to the park, regardless if it's safe or not, to protect the tourist income. The woods are never 100% safe anyway, but with a good standard of training or knowledge and sticking to the marked trails, your chances of making it back home are pretty good. But you throw in some of the stuff these guys have witnessed and people may think twice about camping. All of us love what we do and don't want to risk our jobs, but you can tell these gatherings are a good time to sink some cold beers around the fire and get things off our chest. Now, the third story was the most disturbing personally. One of the veterans turned to us and asked, "So, where are you boys from again?" "Black Elk, South Dakota, 9 months. The longest serving of us," Richard tells him. Pete, Jeff, Daniel, and all of us added their time spent at the park, before I finished off by saying that I started on Monday with a chuckle. Some of the rangers started laughing and joking that they probably scared me away before I even began, and I laughed, not wanting to reveal how right they were. The ranger who asked the question goes all wide-eyed and he looks a little disconcerted. "Black Elk? Well, dang, I used to go camping there all the time back in the early 2000s, but I haven't been back there in years and I don't ever want to." Us newbies all share a concerned look before asking a question that we wished we hadn't. "Why?" The ranger told the following tale. "Well, it was 1999. I was hiking up the hills with my wife. We did a hike there every year, sort of a pre-anniversary ritual that we did. She grew up in Canada near the Ottawa River. The area still had folks with roots and the Indian native tribes who occupied that area way back in the 1600s. and she went on camping trips all the time. So she had grown up on tales of skinwalkers, wendigos, and the like. Anyway, so we were about 2 days into our trip to the Black Elk Forest, real deep in the wilderness, totally off trail. I was an experienced woodsman by that point, and she had been camping all her life, so we were confident that we would be fine. And as far as navigation and wildlife go, we were. But this one night, we decided to go to an area that we had never been to before. We felt adventurous, what can I say? Anyway, we're walking and darn it, we just cannot for the life of us find a good spot to set up for the night. And nightfall hits us pretty darn quick. So by now, we're making our way through the wilderness looking for a clearing to set up camp, and the woods just seem to be getting thicker and denser the further that we go. My wife is ahead of me as I've got my head buried in the map. One gist is, I'm like, I think there could be a good spot up ahead. I almost knocked my wife on her face. I look up asking why she had just stopped walking, and she just starts whimpering saying, "We need to go back, we shouldn't be here." And I'm like, what's got you talking all stupid? Anyway, she just points forward and I follow her finger into the trees. And I kid you not, there's a house in the middle of the woods. It's old, ruined, and half of it looks like it's near burnt to heck. It's potential shelter for the night. So I start heading towards it to take a closer look, and my wife grabs me like I'm about to walk off the Grand Canyon. I'm about to fully divorce this woman because she's dragging me back the way we came, and I'm tired as heck. But I've been with my wife for a long time. She's tough. Nothing really rattles her. But that look in her eye, man, I just knew to do what she said. Anyway, we hike for another hour or two in the opposite direction. Every so often, she's turning to me all wide-eyed and gasping at me. "Did you hear that, Rick?" I tell her that I don't hear nothing and that she's just tired. Her mind's playing tricks on her. But she swears to God that she hears like this muffled screaming back in the distance. I just tell her that it's probably some injured animal and to ignore it. We pick up the pace and get out of there. I didn't tell her at the time, but the thing was, I did hear it. And it wasn't any animal, let me tell ya. We lose the noises eventually, and to our relief, we find a place to set up camp for the night. We get the tent up and get a fire going and sit down to make some quick food before we turn in. We're sitting around the fire heating up some dinner when I confide in her that I had indeed heard the screaming. I explained that I just didn't want her to panic and to keep a clear head until we got to safety. We both discussed just how creepy and unsettling the sound was, and I asked her why she was so spooked when we had spotted the house. She tells me this tale about this woman who lived in Spearfish in the early 90s. She had killed a bunch of kids, and the town came to her house in the woods and drove her out by burning her house down. They grabbed her and did some horrible things, and they left her nailed to a tree so that she could slowly freeze to death in the winter. There's an urban legend that her ghost still inhabits the woods, and if you see her house, to run, because if you go near it or inside it, she'll come after you. She starts having like a joke with me, holding the torch under her chin and making ghost noises, when suddenly her face drops and she's looking at something behind me. She turns to face the fire, and I turn to look at what scared her. She snaps at me, quietly hushing me to face the fire. I can hear twigs snapping and leaves crunching, but she just keeps begging me to not look at her and to just look at the fire, and to not respond to anything she says. She tries to make small talk and keeps her mind occupied, but it was tough. Whatever this thing was, it had followed us, and it was walking towards us. I slowly start to reach for my Glock, but my wife grabbed my arm and told me just to face forward and to ignore it. Easier said than done when it came and stood behind us. Now, I'm sat at 6 o'clock and my wife is sat at 8, and I can feel the thing behind me, wheezing hard and muffled groaning, and the smell, good God, the smell. Like rotten meat, I started to feel bits of warm and putrid air in the back of my neck, like a pig was breathing on me through a sieve. I look over at my wife and she's staying strong, but the tears are coming out of her eyes and I'm just about to pee my pants when I hear this thing say, "Give your face," like in a muffled voice, like they were saying it through a rag or something. I do what my wife says and I just lose myself in the flames. I hear the thing move away from me and head back into the trees. After about 20 minutes, my wife finally speaks. That was the black elk witch. I asked her what the heck she had wanted and how did she know how to get rid of her. She tells me, as the legend goes, if you ever hear her coming and get to a fire, she doesn't like it. If you stare at the fire, she won't come near it to look at you. She told me that she wanted our faces, and that's why she said not to look at her. She also said not to reply to anything she says because if you do, she'll take your tongue. We packed up at first light and we got the heck out of there. I've never been back since. The ranger finished his story and let the weight of it sink in. I think a lot of us were waiting for him to burst into a fit of laughter and slap his knees, knowing how much he had scared us, but it never came. And I was just left thinking of the tales the town folks had told me. The missing people, Georgie Munson. What was going on in the woods of this world? And was there something waiting for me back in the Black Elk wilderness? That Monday, I reported to work for my first day. The first few weeks of my employment here were rather uneventful. I was placed with a senior ranger and I shadowed him around the forest for the best part of the month. In getting to grips with the day-to-day life as a forest ranger, I got to know my senior advisor, whose name was Chris, really well. We spent the day shooting the stuff and talking about our families, our hobbies, our sports teams, and so on. When suddenly one day he gets a call on the radio from the VC. I watch as he speaks into the device. Chris here, over. Hey Chris, we've had a call from a family up on Horse Thief Lake Trailhead. They're saying their 2 children have wandered off in the night. They can't locate them. Can you go and help them out? The voice asked. Okay, me and David will head up, do a preliminary search of the area. Hopefully they haven't made it too far. But we get in the search and rescue guys on standby. Chris says with a serious tone before placing the radio back in its holster. He lets out a deep sigh. Let's go, Dave. We hopped on our ATVs and headed to where we were needed. When we arrived at the camp, a couple of middle-aged adults were stood on the edge of the clearing, looking increasingly anxious and impatient. We hadn't even pulled the vehicle up before they were yelling incoherently. The woman was begging, practically on her knees, pleading for us to help them, whereas the guy was more angry, wondering where the large-scale search party was. Chris began leading the frantic mother back towards the camp to show him where the kids had went missing from. Meanwhile, I was tasked with calming down the irate father, explaining to him that we needed time to assemble the team and volunteers, so we would be making sure the kids weren't just in the nearby vicinity. I tell him that he would be surprised how many missing persons are found within the first 30 minutes. Most of the time, they go to take a leak or a morning walk and they get turned around and can't find their way back. This didn't settle him, however. Understandably, of course, given the circumstances, but he was asserting that his children had been taken. I tried to reassure him that that was unlikely, due to no other people being up in this part of the woods. He wasn't convinced though. We rejoined the others and began asking the parents about their 2 kids. Jenny is 7 years old and Matthew is 10. They're both wearing red winter coats and black boots. Jenny has shoulder-length blonde hair and Matthew has short brown hair. They were both sleeping in there. The kid's dad tells us, pointing at a small green tent. We got up about an hour and a half ago and they were just gone. No sign of them. My brother and his wife are out there right now, still looking, but we don't have enough eyes to find them. We tried calling out and looking around the area, but we've had no luck. So we called you guys. We need help," he added. The mother is beside herself at this point, barely audible due to tears. She's crying and blubbering that she knew someone was watching them, blaming herself for the current state of affairs. I question the dad about what she's talking about, as Chris pulls out his radio and requests the search and rescue team to be deployed, before he heads out into the tree line to aid the other campers in the search. 2 days ago, we were hiking about 10 miles from here when we started hearing noises. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, stuff like that. We looked around but couldn't see anyone. Just assumed it was an animal, but that night we were camped up. Me and my wife were laid in our tent, as were the others. We start to hear something in the distance. It sounded like whistling, I think. It's hard to tell, but it definitely had a tune to it. Could have been the wind though. He begins to explain, having a hard time putting it into context. "Okay," I say, probing him to continue. "Yesterday, more sounds followed us as we hiked. Twigs and branches breaking. And then last night we're in our tents, all of us are asleep. I start having this dream that I can hear the whistling sound again. But this time it's close and all around the camp. It's like the wheels on the bus. Yeah, that's the tune. I wake up and that's when I find my kid's tent door open and they're both gone." His sentence trailed off as his head hangs down and he starts massaging his neck. He gets this serious look on his face, and with tears in his eyes, he says, "I'm starting to think that I wasn't dreaming." I stay silent, processing what he's just told me, as the father starts slapping his own head aggressively. "Idiot, why didn't you go check?" he scolded himself. I sat there awkwardly, trying to calm the man down, assuring him that we would do our best to find his kids. His wife approaches him and they both find comfort in an embrace as they collapse in each other's arms. I watch on gracefully. I can't tell you how many stories that I heard at the retreat about search and rescue ops, where couples start screaming and blaming each other. It just makes the situation a whole lot worse. I request a photo of the 2 kids so I can give it to the SNR team when they arrive. The father hands me a photo out of his wallet and I examine it while Chris walks back into the clearing with the in-laws. No kids with them, much to the further dismay of the parents. I examine the picture. It's a family photo of the mom and dad standing on either side of their 2 missing children. I focused in on the small details of the young'uns' appearances, trying to find those small distinguishing features that would make them more identifiable to potential witnesses. I noticed the mole on the left cheek of Matthew and I made a note of it. Jenny had a peculiar eye color of blue mixed in with green, and I made a note of that too. The search and rescue turned up around an hour later. They got the volunteers and the rangers organized quickly and began dividing the surrounding area on a map into search squares. The entire team would be divided into smaller teams that would search each square thoroughly, radioing in that it was clear once we had finished. We searched every square over the course of 5 days. Each night that went passed with no result. The mom screamed louder and the dad held her tighter, as we all imagined these 2 kids out in the woods, scared, cold, and hungry. But on the 5th night, when these search teams came back into camp, once again empty-handed, the talk began of calling off the search effort. The parents began screaming and yelling, accusing us of giving up too early, but there was nothing more that we could have done. If those kids weren't where we had looked, then they would either be abducted by aliens or they had sprouted wings and flown out of the park. But just as the SNR team leader was explaining, they would keep an eye out and rangers would patrol the trails every day, just in case they turned up. The bushes began to rustle behind us. We all turned to see what it was, some even raising firearms in case it was a large predator, But it wasn't a predator. It wasn't even an animal. It was a kid. Jenny, the missing 7-year-old girl, came pushing her way out of the tree line and into the camp, like nothing had ever happened. She looked clean, healthy, and coherent. She didn't look like a girl who had spent over 120 hours in the wilderness with no supplies or equipment. Her mother ran to her and grabbed her like she would never get to touch her again. We all rushed over to the heartwarming reunion between the parents and their child. But those feelings of warmth and happiness came to a halt as I began to process how wrong this entire scenario was, and the parents realized that Jenny was alone. "Jenny, where is your brother?" the mother asked frantically. Jenny just stares at her vacantly, and her response has lived in my head rent-free ever since. "He's playing with the funny animals." No trace of Matthew was ever found until tonight, which had prompted me to write this because I don't know what's out there, but I think it or they are taunting me, just like they had done to the person before me. He kept a diary, and now I am doing the same. After Jenny pointed to a group in the direction of where she had come from, they took to try and track her movements to find Matthew. The mother stayed with Jenny while the dad went with the group, now reinstilled with the hope that Matthew was alive. Funny animals to him meant a squirrel or a rabbit, but the answer just seemed much more sinister to a neutral. I guess people hear things differently when they have an emotional attachment. I stayed with the mother and Jenny. I sat down beside them, making sure that she had everything she needed: food, water, blankets, whatever. At one point, the mother said that she needed to use the bathroom but couldn't bring herself to leave Jenny. I assured her that I wouldn't let Jenny out of my sight and tell her that I'll sit and talk with her until she gets back. After reluctantly agreeing, she leaves me alone with the girl. I decided to use this time to get a bit more information out of her. "Jenny, where did you go in the night? Your mom says she got up and couldn't find either of you or your brother," I asked with soft caution. "All the funny animals asked us to come play," she responds, like it was the most normal response in the world. I decided to humor her. "Okay, and when you say funny animals, what do you mean?" "The fox man. He asked us to come with him. Matthew didn't want to, so the fox man carried him," she responds cheerfully. I sat eyes wide, as the images in my head did not match her innocent recount of her experience. "Okay, and then what happened when you went with the fox man? Where did he take you?" I asked, trying to keep up my facade of enthusiastic interest that hid just how disturbing this all was. "He took us to the others: the deer man, the bear man, the wolf man, and the kitty man." "Okay," my voice trembling with fear at this point. "And what did they do with you? What made them funny, Jenny?" "They took us to their house, and they were funny because they were like people but with the heads of animals. They didn't wear clothes even though it was cold outside. Oh, and they crawled around on their hands and feet with their bellies up in the air. Funny, huh?" she asked me with a giggle. Yeah, funny," I gasped before zoning out, as a horrifying image of a crab-crawling men with animal heads was haunting my mind. I stayed quiet as the mom began walking back over to us. One question popped into my mind to ask while I had the chance. Was their house in the middle of the woods? It looked kind of burnt, like it had been on fire. I asked curiously. The girl nods, which made my heart sink. "And what happened when you got there? Did you stay there the whole time?" I asked, the seriousness palpable in my expression. "Well, they took us inside. The foxman fed me and sang to me in the attic, and after a while he brought me back to Mom and Dad," she responds with an appreciation to her tone. The mom is just about to reach us when I ask what about her brother. "The other funny animals took him down to the basement to play with them. They said that they would bring him back when they were finished, so he'll be back soon." The mother sits down and gives Jenny another big hug, like she had just found her all over again. I smiled politely, silently assuring her that she's been no trouble. Jenny was wrong though. They never found Matthew, nor the house that he was apparently taken to. I had told Chris the details from my disturbing conversation with Jenny, but Chris informed me that he had been a ranger around these parts for 12 years, and he's never come across a house in the woods, ruined or new. We searched nonetheless over the next few months, but nothing ever came of it. This was my first missing persons case. It did rattle me, I'll admit that. The sound her mother made when the party came back empty-handed, good God. I think the fact Jenny came back gave her hope. So to have it ripped away once again, it just broke her. I felt guilty. I gave the couple my phone number and agreed to keep an eye out for their boy and to do everything I could to find him. Chris told me that I shouldn't have done this. I felt that he was being a little cold and harsh at the time. I was just trying to give the couple some peace of mind. But unfortunately, I saw his point in the end. Over the next 3 months, I must have received over 200 calls from that couple, demanding that I find their boy. And when we found nothing, guess who was the punching bag? It got to the point where I simply had to ignore their calls. They eventually stopped and I assumed they had accepted their loss, but no. The officer called me one day and told me that the couple had raised a complaint against me. They scolded me for not setting boundaries and getting too emotionally invested in a job where we can't get emotionally invested. People go missing in the woods all the time. I'm gonna have to get used to that apparently. The higher-ups informed me that protocol dictates that I should be placed on suspension while the complaint is investigated. I began to hand over my firearm and my ranger's badge in a huff when Bill told me to stop. He whispered to the other shot callers before they turned back to face me. They were confident that I wouldn't lose my job at the end of it. It would go down as just a lack of foresight due to inexperience. There was no malice in what I did, and I didn't get anybody hurt or killed due to misconduct or incompetence. The parents were just looking for a scapegoat to blame for the disappearance of their son, and my do-gooder attitude had put me in the firing line. But regardless, they had made a complaint about my conduct, messing with their heads and exploiting their grief by making false promises or the words they used in their letter to the office. They made me out to be a careless sociopath, and due to the Forestry services being a government office, I needed to be punished accordingly. But they informed me that I had an alternative to simply going home for 3 months while this thing ran its course. One of the fire watchers had abandoned his post without notice 2 weeks ago. We were into the spring and it could be months before they found a new recruit for the tower, and summer was coming. They offered me the tower position while I sat on my suspension. I would be out of the way in case any inspectors of the couple came around. And rather than sitting on my butt at home, I could earn a new skill and keep my knowledge and mental mapping of the woods on point. Seemed like a win-win at the time. I've been in this tower for 3 weeks at the time of writing. I was given a crash course by Bill as he brought me up here. I have enough food for 1 month, but if I need more, I radio in and they can have some brought to me. Bathroom porter cabin was at the foot of the tower. I had books, a TV, and a stack of crappy DVDs to keep me somewhat entertained. I was to watch for large fires throughout the day, along with a daily patrol of a 5-mile radius, looking for reckless campfires. The tower was in the middle of Backwoods wilderness, around 20 miles from the Black Hills. No trails, so any campfires around here were strictly forbidden, especially this time of the year. This seemed like a pretty easy job and one that would fit my personality, as I wasn't exactly a social butterfly. But after around 3 days, I started to miss the human interaction. Because when you're alone, isolated, and in the middle of the deep dark woods at night, things can get eerie to say the least. It was night 5 when I found it. I was laying on the bed listening to the breeze whistle through the trees. I didn't know if it was the conversation with Jenny still ruling my mind, but I swore the whistling began to form a tune. I told myself that I was just exhausted and it was because of this bed. I'd never felt so uncomfortable in my life. It was like one of the lats were deformed and digging into my back. I climbed onto the floor, grabbing hold of the mattress and driving my knees into the floor in order to lift it. I found the problem instantly. The lats were fine. The mattress was a little thin, but the problem lied in the fact that hidden beneath the mattress and in the middle two lats were two VHS tapes and a ledger. I looked down in confusion in what I was seeing. I took them out and I placed them down on my bedside table, allowing the mattress to drop back perfectly into place. I hopped back onto the bed and picked up the two VHS tapes. They looked old even for their era. DVDs would be ancient these days, but at least I'd be able to see what's on them. So instead, I picked up the ledger. A green leather sleeve was hugging the cluster of white paper pages with a black elastic strap holding it all together. I turned on my bedside lamp, peeled back the strap, and opened up the first page. For anyone who reads this, please read with caution. Heed what I have written as I have survived this long. But if you find this before I can give it to you, be careful, I wasn't able to finish it. The ominous message was all that sat in the middle of the page, and it made me sit upright in bed, instantly grabbing my attention. I turned the page once more, and this time was greeted with a full page of writing, neat, rational even. I bent the book into a rainbow shape and let the 100 or so pages flick over and over like a flip book. I noticed two things. The entire book bar the last two pages was full, and the more the pages went on, the more erratic and frantic the man's handwriting became. I read the last two words on the last page of the book. She's here. A chill ran down my spine as I read it. I quickly flicked back to the front of the book and began reading from the first page. My name is Mark Ellis. I was a fire watcher. I was stationed in Tower 5, located in the Black Hills of the Black Elk Wilderness. And if you are here attempting to do my job because I am gone, then there are things you need to know in order to survive. Things that will help you see the next morning. Because believe me, they are out there. She is out there. Waiting, watching, pushing, trying to get you to make a mistake. One mistake and you belong to her. You're in her house now and she does not want you here. I don't know what to make of all of this yet, but I pulled out my laptop and decided to start making my own journal about the things that I've seen and heard so far. And soon, hopefully, I'll be able to update you with the things that I have seen and heard since. I'll keep you all posted. Speak soon. Today's episode is sponsored by Ghostbed. Did you know that you'll end up spending 1/3 of your life sleeping? That's a huge chunk of time, so it's important to make your sleeping needs a priority. Ghostbed provides high-quality and super comfortable award-winning mattresses crafted in the United States and Canada. With their patented cooling technology exclusive to Ghostbed mattresses, you'll never have to worry about being too hot or uncomfortable when you're sleeping. Ghostbed mattresses, sheets, and pillows are made from premium materials designed for durability and comfort. And they also come with a 101-night at-home sleep trial on all mattresses and pillows, and over a 20-year warranty, plus free shipping and returns included on mattresses. Are you ready for a more comfortable night of sleep? Well, visit ghostbed.com/MrCreeps. And because we're all about sharing the love here on Creepscast, use the code MrCreeps to save 50% off your purchase site-wide. That's right, 50%. The past year has been complicated. I've done my best to get through it, but I started to feel the weight start to come down as the days got closer to the holidays. My mother passed away on Christmas last year. My father wasn't able to handle it. He left without a word, leaving his 16-year-old son enough money to live on. We expected him to be back once he had calmed down, but I've only seen him twice this year. My grandparents took over looking after me. They believed that my father would come around at some point. I agreed with them only to not shatter their hopes. I no longer saw that man as my father. No matter what he did, we would never be a family again, and I felt guilty for that. My uncle volunteered to look after me over Christmas. He had rented a nice cabin that he wanted us to spend time together. My family figured being away from the city, surrounded by a beautiful winter landscape, might help my mental state over the holiday. They also thought that being around my cousin, who was around the same age as me, might give me a little bit of company. I again didn't bother to correct them that I didn't really care for my cousin. People called him the miracle baby. After years of trying, my aunt got pregnant with him, but it came at the cost of her life. He had been born on Christmas Eve, and she had died on Christmas Day. I saw the holidays also affected my uncle, but my cousin didn't seem to carry any weight of his mother's death. I really only agreed to go on the trip to try to support my uncle, now that I kind of understood where he was coming from. I arrived later in the day. My uncle met me outside and helped me with my bags. The cabin felt cozy with a fire going in the living room. It had central heat, so the fire was mostly only for show. He quickly took my bags up to the spare bedroom so I could go and see my cousin. He expected us to get along great that week. I found him sitting on the couch, switch in hand with the volume nearly maxed out. I said hello, but I didn't get a response back. Soon my uncle came out with eggnog and cookies, doing his best to appear festive. Deep down, I saw how much effort he put into appearing happy for us. "Why don't you two hook up the game to the TV and play together? The game can do that, right?" my uncle had offered. "Oh, it's a single-player game," my cousin said, not breaking focus. His face fell, trying to think of a grateful way to carry the conversation. I quickly stood up to walk towards where my bags were placed. "I have a handheld game too. We can chill on the couch together," I said, and that seemed to resolve the issue. I still played 3DS games. I saw no reason to upgrade when I could get games for pretty much nothing. I barely had time to play with school nowadays either way. When I came back to the living room, my uncle was in the kitchen getting dinner ready, and my cousin was kind enough to leave me 2 cookies and half a glass of eggnog. His behavior should have bothered me, but I found myself not caring in the slightest about him. My chest felt too full missing my mother to really care about his attitude. After dinner, I helped clean the dishes and then I went to my room. I felt exhausted from being around people this time of year. I got into bed and tried to fall asleep, but instead I ended up staring out the window at the snow gently falling for most of the night. My mind not as peaceful as the weather outside. I got up early to help my uncle with breakfast the next day. He looked about as tired as I did. My cousin didn't come down for food and he slept in until about noon, and I was fine with that. The cabin was pretty quiet when he slept. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and soup for lunch when a certain somebody rolled out of bed. I didn't say anything to him. Who doesn't want to sleep in on Christmas break? "It's so cold in here," I heard from the other room while I stayed in the kitchen, finishing putting away dry dishes. The chores helped me take my mind off of things, so I insisted on doing them. "Kev, the heater's already on. Why don't you go sit by the fire?" my uncle replied. "Well, because the fire isn't started yet, Jason." I flinched at the words. Kevin refused to call my uncle a dad, but instead used his first name. He sounded overly annoyed over nothing. Maybe he didn't want to share a holiday with someone that he barely knew. My uncle didn't get upset. He just joked that his son was grumpy from oversleeping and offered to show him again how to start the fire. I made my way over to watch from the open doorway. Jason on his knees, nursing a flame, and Kevin sitting on the couch, the video game music already pouring out. I turned away, starting to feel hot and not wanting to listen to the same few battle songs play over and over again. Jason found me a few hours later in the spare bathroom cleaning the floor. It was pretty clean beforehand, but I still found spots in the corners and hidden patches of dust behind the toilet. "What are you doing down there?" he asked, confused on my sudden cleaning spree. "Mowing the lawn," I answered back on reflex. My father had a habit of saying that phrase every time somebody had asked him a question with an obvious answer. I may not want anything to do with them, but some of his quirks stayed with me. My uncle smiled and got down on the floor next to me. "You don't have to do this. How about you and Kev go hang out for a bit? Are there any new shows that you want to talk about?" I shook my head, not looking up from my work. "I'm fine doing this, it relaxes me. I want to give him some space too. I bet he's not happy that someone is invading his time off." Jason wanted to disagree. Christmas should be a time to spend with all of your family if it was possible. He didn't want me to feel unwanted. "I'll talk to him," he said and stood back up. That would only make Kevin hate me more. I opened my mouth about to talk him out of it when the lights had flickered off. Jason was a calm person and I've never seen him upset. He had just tried the light switch a few times and shrugged, thinking it worse that he needed a brave outside to start the generator. A knocking came from the door soon after we had left the upstairs bathroom. It echoed through the cabin and for some reason, it made my blood run cold. All the power of the cabin went out. For a second I thought the neighbors had the same issue, but it was far too soon for another person from a different cabin to be able to make it over here. "Jason, the door!" Kevin shouted from his spot on the couch between the knocks. I still heard his game music, the sounds being overpowered by that knocking. My uncle started to walk down the stairs. I found myself reaching out, wanting to stop him for an unknown reason. "Who knocks this many times? Honestly, I heard you the first time." Jason muttered as I followed behind him. He told me to stay in the hallway so that he could talk to whoever was at the door. He thought that maybe somehow the wind was blowing something against it and someone wasn't rude enough to knock so loudly and for so long. I didn't see much from where I stood. I heard the knocking stop as the door opened, and I felt the winter chill sweep through the cabin by the wind. And then I heard my uncle scream, "Kids, run!" Those two short words froze me to the spot instead of my body doing what was requested. He came running from the door, his arms wrapping protectively around me. He wasn't much taller than myself and couldn't really lift me off the ground to drag me away from the threat, but I was still a kid in his eyes and not nearly an adult. A black shape came pouring through the door, the smell of pine flooding the cabin. Kevin came rushing over to see what the fuss was all about. We were unable to do anything as the creature found its way inside the cabin. Branching fingers of black roots covered the front hallway, reaching up to the ceiling. They connected to what looked to be clothing of what walked inside. The face covered with a dome of more black roots, puffs of breath came out between the twigs as it walked. I didn't know how this thing fit through the door. It was almost as tall as the ceiling. The creature took 2 steps inside on legs much like a goat. Frost covered the wooden floorboards creeping out from the hoofed feet. The air dropped so low that I was shivering from dread and the sudden coldness. For some reason, my body started acting on its own and pushed Jason behind me. Kevin stood in the living room doorway, mouth open and face pale. The monster stood, unseeing eyes staring us down, and the sounds of the roots creaked through the cabin. "What the? Are you like Krampus or something?" Kevin whispered, mostly to himself. A laugh came from between the black roots, sounding like cracking ice. A set of glowing eyes flickered to life in the darkness of that creature's face. It raised a set of gnarled hands, tipped with claws almost in a greeting. I am no such thing. I simply travel with the snow. I have come a very long way looking for a meal. Once I have eaten, I am able to move on, bringing the weather with me. The voice was low, almost a whisper that didn't match the creature's size. Jason stood up, trying to act brave in front of the two teens. I have a lot of food, you can. I require one of your bodies for my meal. You may pick whoever you would like to hand over. The monster replied in an ice-cold tone. My uncle nearly faded on the spot. His eyes darted around trying to think his way out of this situation. He refused to offer either of us up, and the only other option was himself. I didn't blame him for hesitating. Any sane person wouldn't jump right into being eaten by a monster. While I watched his internal debate, Kevin slipped away into the living room. He snagged some newspaper and a lighter. I was helpless to stop him as he charged at the monster, flaming newsprint in hand. He grabbed a pretty big bundle so he was able to reach the creature with the flames. Get screwed! He arched his arm to toss the fire at the creature, when a long hand reached down to grab the flames. It enclosed over the entire bundle, putting out the fire right away. The hand then went to Kevin's shoulder to forcefully turn him around and then push him into me. Honestly, if I wasn't so scared, the exchange might have been a little bit funny. I am not so cruel as to rip apart your loved one right away. I am able to wait for a long time. Make your peace and then send out your choice when you are ready. I needed to hold back Kevin from doing something stupid again. The creature turned and as quickly as it appeared, it had left. The cabin door opened, blowing slightly in a cold wind. My uncle raced over to the door to slam it shut. He locked it and then pulled the heavy shoe rack in front of the door as if that might do something. Don't be stupid. Let's get to the car and get out of here, Kevin shouted. He pulled out of my arms and knocked my ribs hard enough to make a bruise. I sucked in my anger towards him to not make the situation more heated. Language, and it's not there. That thing must have moved it, Jason said, and he almost raised his voice. Kevin refused to believe it. He shoved past to look out the front window. Not seeing what he wanted to, he ran to the living room to get a better look outside. I meekly followed, my heart racing to see what I already knew. In the past few seconds, the wind outside had picked up. It started to howl, kicking snow around, making the outside world completely white. No car could be seen beyond the front porch. If we strayed outside, the wind and cold may kill us in a short while if that monster didn't get to us first. The entire cabin shook with the wind as a terrible winter blizzard came down. We were without power with only a fireplace for warmth. I assumed that we had about a week's worth of food, maybe a little bit less. The only way out simply was for us to make a terrible choice. If we all didn't want to starve to death in this cabin, one of us needed to die. My body shook, matching the windows rattling from the wind. We're all gonna sleep in the living room. Can you guys help me bring the blankets and everything downstairs? My uncle said, his voice strained. And Kevin snapped. He stormed over to his father, saying how stupid that was. The living room windows were too big and exposed. He said that the monster could smash them at any time to scoop us up. He said that we should lock ourselves inside a bathroom with no windows until help arrives. Jason was patient, letting Kevin burn himself out. In a calm voice, my uncle said that we needed to stay by our only source of heat. I silently agreed with him. We both got to work, bringing all the blankets, sheets and pillows and even towels into one spot to stay warm. I started to bring all the canned goods to the living room to make less trips to the kitchen in the future. At least the water still worked, but we didn't know for how long. Jason started to fill up every empty container with water just in case. Luckily, a small bathroom was next to the living room. Kevin stayed on the couch and played a Switch until the battery gave out. He swore, tossing it across the room. I flinched at the sound of the Joy-Con coming off on the landing. He then locked himself in the bathroom for over an hour. We left him alone to vent out his anger. Soon, we had the living room set up with a fire going. I stared at the pile of wood, worried that we may run out of things to burn before our food ran short. I brought some books, so I decided to try and read them before we needed to sacrifice the pages to the flames. The wind outside never let up. If what that monster said was true, the snow wouldn't stop until we let it eat one of us. A long silence came between us, the crackling of the fire and the wind the only sounds. Thank you again for being understanding when it comes to Kevin. He's always had a slight anger problem. All this stress is getting to him. Jason admitted and didn't look away from the flames. I read between the lines. He wanted to thank me for not insisting that we toss Kevin out because of how he's been acting. I didn't really like the guy, but I didn't want him to die. He did try and save us with the whole flaming newspaper thing. I wondered if he had thought it through a little bit more, if he could have done some damage. The monster didn't give us a time limit. Maybe we can think of a way out of this, but tonight we should just calm down a little bit. I said and my uncle agreed. We wouldn't be able to think of any kind of plan being as stressed out as we were. But I mean, what could we really do? The landline was down, our cell phones didn't have service, no power, only a fire for heat and no weapons besides some kitchen knives. My uncle had rented this cabin for camping, not hunting. There was nobody expected at the cabin for 2 weeks, after we were meant to leave. Could we stretch out our food for 3 weeks between 3 people? Maybe. At least our water was fine. The taps and shower ran lukewarm, good enough to get clean with, but not good enough to warm up. If we took one step outside, that creature would eat us. I ran through our dire situation in my head 100 times, finding no answer. Kevin came back from the bathroom. He kicked me off the couch to curl up under the blankets. He refused to look at us. I didn't even try to talk with him. Our dinner was a single can of soup. I refused to eat because I wasn't feeling very well. Kevin, of course, complained, asking for more food. Jason never raised his voice but kept saying that we needed to ration what we had left. Finally, my cousin gave up to return to the couch to sulk. I brought the bowls and pots to the kitchen to wash. Jason followed behind to gather up all the wooden cutting boards, the stirred spoons, and even the knife block. He knew that our firewood was going to run out within a few days, and the rest was outside along the side of the cabin. He regretted not bringing in more beforehand. I glanced at the wooden kitchen table, wondering when we would need to start breaking it into pieces. With the snow outside, the night wasn't very dark. I could see easy enough into the gloom. The wind kept blowing, causing me to feel colder than I actually was. Jason wasn't able to sleep, but Kevin had passed out on the couch, snoring away at the ones awake stared at the fire. The wooden knife block burned for at least 2 hours and then broke apart into embers. "Do you still miss her?" I asked, suddenly unaware of what made me say such a thing. My uncle looked over a bit startled by the question, and soon his face had turned into a sad smile. He stared back at the flames, and knowing this conversation would come up this week, but wasn't really sure of what to say. "I'll always miss her. Weirdly enough, you look more like her than Kevin does. But seeing both of you reminds me that she's not really gone. I don't think that she'll ever be fully gone, you know. When we first got married, she hated the spare bedroom's paint color. I came home to see her repainting the room an ugly blue. I asked her what she was doing and she answered, mowing the lawn. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. My aunt had died before I was born, and yet parts of her were passed down through genetics and from my father, who had copied some of her traits. A great deal of my personality was shaped by my mother, because I tended to spend more time with her while growing up. I had wondered if I might ever stop missing her, as if this feeling might just go away someday. I knew that it wouldn't, because the parts of her were woven into who I was. Kevin snored so loudly that it woke him up for a second. He rolled over and fell right back asleep. Jason and I almost laughed loud enough to wake him up again. I found a bundle of blankets, ready to try and sleep for a few hours. I woke up first, finding the fire low. I got it going again, and then I heard Kevin waking up. He complained about the cold, and I ignored him. I wondered how much of his mother was passed down to make his father be so patient with him all the time. We got started on making breakfast, planning on making eggs with a slice of bread, when an issue came up. The bread was missing. I was positive that there had been a full loaf sitting on the counter the night before. I spent almost an hour of looking, and that delayed cooking. Finally, Kevin snapped, unable to take the cold and his hunger. "Stop making a show. You must have eaten it in the middle of the night. You didn't have dinner, so you must have been hungry. If you're not going to be honest, I say that we toss you out." "Kev, no one is getting tossed out," Jason said, trying to get between us. "Did you eat it last night?" I asked Kevin, my voice so cold that it shocked me. "What? No. I heard some rustling, so it must have been you. My dad wouldn't." "If you heard me eating, why didn't you stop me? Or are you just lying to make me look bad in order to have a reason to kick me out?" I said calmly. I wasn't as calm as my voice had sounded. I was scared to death. This was 2 against 1. I bit down on the inside of my mouth to keep my fear and anger down. "No." "Kev, stop it. You know better." "I understand that I'm an outsider here. Your dad loves you, and I'm just the nephew. And I'm someone who doesn't have anyone expecting me to return back home. I can see the reasoning for wanting me to be that monster's meal. But I would have hoped that we could have been open about this and not so quickly resort to lies and backstabbing." We all remained silent in the cold kitchen, the temperature so low that I thought that I saw my breath. I wore 2 sweaters and 3 layers of socks, and I still shook. I had never seen such a hot, angry hatred on somebody's face before. Kevin gritted his teeth, his fists at his side, ready to strike. His face turned red, and before his father could grab him, he came charging. "Are you calling me a liar?" His body knocked me to the ground, and I was smart enough to cover my face with my arms pressed together. He punched down as hard as he could, but he hit my forearms instead of my face. The attack only lasted for a few seconds, and Jason pulled Kevin off and got a few knocks to the cheek for his effort. The teenager pulled away, still red with anger. He charged back to the living room, leaving me breathing hard on the kitchen floor. Jason got down, shaking with his cheek turning red from the punch. In a few hours, a bruise would appear in that spot. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. He's never not like this." He sounded so distraught that it hurt my chest. I sat up shaken, but all right considering. "It's not your fault what's going on. Well, it sucks. But I'm gonna grab some blankets and stay in a room upstairs," I said, brushing myself off. "You'll freeze," Jason protested. "I've been without heat before. I'll be fine under a few layers. If I get too cold, I'll come back down. At least a day or so away from Kevin to let him cool down would be ideal." As much as my uncle wanted to disagree, the pain in his cheek proved that keeping us separated would be the best idea, at least for a little while. I waited by the stairs for him to gather some blankets for me and some pillows. Kevin didn't say anything and just watched from the couch. I noticed that he tossed some more wood in the fire, a bit too much. We would need to start to break down the dressers all too soon if Jason didn't keep an eye on him. I took 2 books with me. I got settled into bed and my hands were getting a little cold as I read. In a short while, my uncle came upstairs with some scrambled eggs. My stomach growled from not eating the night before. I thanked him, but we didn't speak any further. That day, I spent in bed listening to the blizzard outside and tried to forget what kind of situation we were in. Jason was able to cook some pasta over the fire. It didn't taste great, but it was warm. I took my dirty dishes downstairs and retired back to bed. I wondered how long we may be stuck for and if I needed to avoid Kevin for the rest of this day. I drifted off to sleep, feet a bit cold but otherwise warm enough. For the first time in a while, I had a dream about my mother. If by some chance I had died in this cabin, I started to wonder if there was an afterlife and if I could see her again. I wanted to tell her 1,000 things that my grief clouded when she was still here. I was still half asleep thinking about her when I felt the weight on my chest. My brain registered the cold blade of the knife against my throat, and for a few seconds the fear of death was replaced by the calm of wanting to see my mother again. I snapped out of my acceptance of death and knowing that she wouldn't want me to die so young. I didn't dare move. My thoughts raced through my head trying to figure out a way out of this. Kevin sat on my chest, a wild look in his eyes, the knife shaking in his hand from excitement instead of regret over what he was doing. "That thing never said you two needed to be alive to be eaten," Kevin said, his voice trembling from joy. I was not having this. I refused to let this idiot take my life. I feared for my uncle in that moment. Was he safe and asleep downstairs, or did my cousin silently deal with him before heading to take care of me? I will admit, I expected something like this of him. Nothing so extreme as murder, but I thought that we may get into another fight in this room. I slipped my arm under my pillow, the blankets shielding my movements. Before the knife came down, I pushed up, knocking Kevin off balance. He cried out, stumbling back, and I swung down my weapon directly to his temple. A sickening crack came as the hammer slammed against his skull. I grabbed the knife and wasted no time checking on if the strike had knocked him out or not. My socks slipped against the hardwood flooring. I nearly fell down the flight of steps to the living room trying to find Jason. He was face down in a pile of blankets. In the light of the low embers, I saw a spot of blood on the back of his head. I didn't really have a plan. I just went over to him checking for a pulse. That woke him up, making him slowly sit up with my help. Kevin had knocked him in the head with some firewood, and then he went to take care of me. I helped Jason to his feet, his head still groggy. I let him use my shoulder for support, then it all hit me. Now what? Would I really need to force Kevin outside? Or would we just lock him in a room until help had arrived? A primal scream of rage that came from the top of the stairs made it clear that the second choice was no longer an option. I refused to leave my uncle behind. I forced him behind me and raised my hammer ready for a fight. I've never been so scared in my life. Seeing Kevin charging down the stairs with a closet rod in his hand terrified me more than the monster that started all of this. He gave me no time to plan. He just jumped right into fighting, the metal rod coming down painfully on the arm that tried to block it. I got tossed back to the ground again, my hammer knocked out of my hand. At least being in such a rage, Kevin didn't even think to pick it up. Finally, Jason came around. He pulled Kevin off after a minute of the attack, but it felt much longer. He tossed his son halfway across the room, the effort making him dizzy, making him collapse to the floor. I found the hammer ready to defend us both. "I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you." I only got to my knees when Kevin's screams of rage scared me too much. I stopped moving for a second. He had turned completely feral. I wouldn't be able to win in a fight with someone like him. He came again, face red and eyes wild, the metal rod slightly bent but a deadly weapon in his hands. Everything happened so fast I wasn't sure what had transpired. I tried getting out of the way, but the rod hit my head so hard that I saw stars. I fell to the ground thinking that I was going to die. When my sight came back, I saw Jason and Kevin still, almost embracing each other, both breathing hard and Jason's face filled with horror. Kevin's eyes went to his stomach and then to his father's face, the rod dropping from his hand, and he stumbled back a step. Red started to bloom outwards from a small spot on his stomach. With an expression of disbelief, Kevin placed a hand on his stomach, staining it. A bloody knife dropped from Jason's hands, the same one that Kevin wanted to kill me with. "Dad?" he asked in a tone that made him sound like a child. I raised my head, wanting to get back up, only for the darkness to take over again. I don't know how long I was out. I woke up, feeling oddly warm and finding the cabin bright. The light hurt my eyes. Blinking, pounding pain came to my head, and I refused to give in. I sat up, trying to make sense of what had happened. The lights were on, that meant we had power and heat again. That fact made my stomach drop to the floor, my body turning colder than it had been in the past few days. On shaking legs, I got up to follow the trail of blood leading to the front door. It looked as if somebody was dragged along the hallway. The shoe rack pushed aside and front door open, letting in the cold. My uncle stood, face white as the fallen snow outside. Tears came to my eyes, but I refused to let them take over. I stopped next to my uncle, his eyes wide and staring out into nothing. "Is Kevin?" I asked in a weak voice, unable to say the full question. I didn't want this. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want this. Because my uncle loved his son and I loved my uncle. He shouldn't need to suffer through another missing person in his life. To my shock, he reached over to pull me into a hug. His body stiff and cold from standing in the doorway for so long. "There was never a Kevin. There has only been you," my uncle answered back. His expression and voice chilled me to the bone. It was as if the fear of what he had said had turned into a physical thing that wanted to force itself through my throat as a scream. I swallowed it down, making my chest hurt. My stomach twisted, unable to accept what I had pushed down. With all my willpower, I nodded and held him back. If this was what was needed for my uncle to deal with what he did, I was going to go along with it. I let him sit in his bedroom for a full day in shock. We could have left at any point, but I needed to clean up the mess that we had left behind. For some reason, Jason wanted to stay at the cabin for Christmas. I scrubbed away the stains and put the cabin back in order. When he came out of his room in the morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He cheerfully made pancakes while humming Christmas songs. When Christmas did come along, any of Kevin's gifts were given to me. The tags weren't even changed. I acted along knowing that this was for the best. I'll be going home with my uncle tomorrow. This cabin is going to sit empty for a while without anybody knowing of what happened. It didn't feel right for Kevin's death to be swept under the rug. I needed to tell someone, anyone, of what we needed to do. That monster may come back here to target the next renters, or it may go to wherever it is able to snow for the next meal. I only hope the next set of people don't suffer the way that my uncle did. I called my grandparents saying that Jason wanted me to stay for a while. They were fine with that due to their age. They found it hard looking after a teen and wanted to retire somewhere warm. I don't know what to do when people come asking about my cousin's location, or if anyone is going to notice him missing. Until they do, I'm going to keep my uncle's delusion alive. I think after everything, it would be unfair to drag him back to reality. I hope that we can carry on like this for when the next Christmas comes along. Maybe even more after that if we're lucky. The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was that they were loud, which meant that they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I had been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I would have thought the sound was. But then the pitch changed and it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound. I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling like you're so close to nature. But knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sound, it sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone or alive. Did those things know that I was here? Were they planning their attack? Or was it just a gathering of something, like a harmless chill session in the woods in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. Forget the tent and my supplies, just leave. And for a brief moment I nearly listened. Later I wished that I would had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know that I was here, a fire would draw them in like flies to, something that I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife and kept it firm in my grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night. Sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds could be bad for my health. As I lay there eyes wide, listening to the horrible sounds that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sound stopped, so did all other noises of the forest. It was as if somebody had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster until I realized that it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of calm blue oceans and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation that I was in. Apparently, I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me, when all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent. I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning, the sun was up, and the birds were singing. I took both of those as good signs. And being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days, or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today in the daylight, as the sun's rays bathed me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night the forest seemed like the most horrifying place that I had ever been, and today it looks like all the beauty of nature is spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear and it was headed my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away or turned down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it snuffling around the campsite, looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing, but using it was another. That was my last resort, spray and run. The sniffling got louder and I could hear the bottom edges of the tent being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tent. And then there was a pause, a dreadful pause. The kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffling started again, this time leading away from the tent. And breathing a cautiously optimistic sign of relief, I opened the tent flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said. Should I stay or should I go? I had only been camping up here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me just a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was dry, so there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping that it had gone some other way. It was easy going, making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye for the bear though. No use in getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail then decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and trample down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant that there had been a fire, and the ashes could blow into the trees if the wind picked up and caused a wildfire. It was a good point even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, and then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path toward the clearing, making me literally descend into darkness, and it wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around looking for anything out of the ordinary and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly the trees opened up and daylight shone brightly on the clearing and the remnants of a fire with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of a patch of grass with no ring of stones surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like somebody had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would somebody bring paint out here in the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire looking for the answer to this mystery, and unfortunately I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down and moved the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw that it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint, they were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all over the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the heck up, and I hightailed it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. And just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I had been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was right in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth, and then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wished that I had worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified that I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bared. I knew right then that it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I had never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thought going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I had known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I would have done it the night before. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me. It was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze, and I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing that I had ever seen before, and it stood on hind legs at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like a deer's skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment and then started toward the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed that I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter that there was no way I could sprint all the way there without collapsing and having a heart attack. But just then I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down, sort of fight that would have been awesome to watch. From inside of a bunker with 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Just me alone without a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way that I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me that I had to at least slow to a walk. I didn't dare to stop. I knew that I had to keep moving. It was my only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of the fight echoed throughout the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, and then hear it echo back again. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped that it would have lasted for a while longer. Maybe whichever one won would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. I mean, surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight had ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around me that had been chattering away suddenly falling silent was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt that I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight though, and I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud now, and I knew that it was right there, but I didn't dare look back. Run, don't think, just run. My thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug in my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief and terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. And then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and dove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss, crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it, and I found myself swerving to miss the biggest one so my car wouldn't bottom out. But by doing so, the monster had gained ground. It was almost within reach of my rear bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for the ride home. It wasn't long until I was pulling into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I had left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me and I stripped, threw my pants and underwear in the trash, and then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying off, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts, and I came back out to the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew that I would have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal, so I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed seeing the trees of the park far in the distance, and knowing that I would never visit there again. But before I turned toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes just to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight toward my house. As I watched, it looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked. Mine full of fear, its full of menace. I ran through the house, making sure that every door and window was locked. After that, I went to my bedstand and pulled out my snub-nose 38, checking to make sure that it was loaded and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them in my pocket. Running back out to the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked into the backyard. It was dark out and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see it suddenly appear in front of me. But I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather than that I was going crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the light, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard and all the way to the woods that bordered my property, but there was nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step and I turned back toward the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn to the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. And my prayers were answered. There was nothing out there. As tempted as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like one of those scenes in a horror movie where the camera zooms in while going backward. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath that I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door, and the door frame had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real, and it was here, and it had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown fur an instant before it charged at me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door just as it hit the doorframe. Its antlers slammed into the doorframe, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I lay on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it had missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me. The same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room somehow, I had the pressure of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911. As I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me.
911, what's your emergency?
I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me.
Are you talking about a person?
No, what don't you understand about the word monster? I shouted.
Alright, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges.
Fine, send the cops. Maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Ah, son of a... I said as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and the oil tank and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barely breathing, I listened to its measured steps as it crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks. telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn toward the stairs and thought about making a run for this other door that led outside when my phone rang. "Hello?" I whisper-screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible.
Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster?
"Well, yes, who's this?" There's a pause as I heard the footsteps change direction.
I'm from another agency. Could you describe the monster for me?
"So you're from one of those three-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls?"
Could you describe the monster for me?
"Well, it's huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and wearing the fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers like a deer." I heard a sharp intake of air.
Where is it?
I gave him my address.
I meant where is it in the house?
"On the first floor and I'm in the basement, but I think it's coming down here." Just then I heard the basement door open. Gotta go," I whispered and then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement so that I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled up in the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The puffing of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes, but I had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would only bounce off of bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hope that I might somehow survive. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed and then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshot was deafening, especially in such a closed space. My ears were ringing so loud that I could barely hear the monster screaming and tearing my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from its thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flame engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon coming from the underworld. I ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved that I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil that had splashed on me had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but the monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from it. And this was it. I would die this horrible agonizing death trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it had extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me, like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. I awoke in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner staring back at me, attached to a man that I had never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" "Not yet. It was close, though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah, you're not going to be taking any hiking trips for a while. You've got burns all over your legs that'll need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again. Are you the guy that I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah, do you mind telling me the rest of what happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and a notepad. Sure, since you saved my life, it's the least that I could do. He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. What happened to the monster anyway? I said. He hesitated. It got away, didn't it? Yeah, he said, lowering his head a little. We lost the trail after it had extinguished itself, but don't worry, we'll find it. I didn't comment on my opinion of the competency of government agencies out of respect for the man who had saved my life, but suffice it to say I wouldn't be sleeping very soundly once I got back home. Where would you like me to start? I said. The beginning is always a good place. A week later, I walked out of the hospital, literally. The doctor said that I had been very lucky. Because I had been sweating, the oil didn't stick to my skin, and since oil and water don't mix, it was literally floating on top of the sweat on my legs. Even though I did receive some burns, they weren't nearly as bad as they could have been. I guess I'm just one lucky guy. Now I get to go home and barricade myself in my house, hoping that thing forgets about me, or better yet, that it had died from its burn injuries. When I got home, I walked up to the front door and saw these scratches on it. I took the steps one at a time, looking at the door frame where it had gotten stuck, trying to gouge my eyes out. I opened the front door, slowly expecting it to be waiting behind the door to nab me and drag me off into the forest to do unspeakable things to me. I realized my white knuckles from the doorknob, then quickly shut and locked the door. The splinters and sawdust covered the carpet, along with muddy, inhuman footprints. After doing a quick walkthrough of the house to make sure that it wasn't there, I grabbed the vacuum and started cleaning. I had just finished when a knock on my door nearly sent me through the ceiling. Peeking out through the peephole, I saw the man who had saved me that night and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I said. "Came to check up on you. Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. He stepped in and scoped out the room. "It's surprisingly clean for having a Wendigo nearly destroy it. I just got done vacuuming." He eyed me up and down. "Of course you did," he said, plopping down into a comfortable chair. "So how goes the hunt?" I said, sitting in my usual chair. He shifted in his seat. "It's going well." "So you've captured it then?" "Well, not exactly." "Killed it?" He shook his head. "Then what have you done?" "Well, I saved your life." "And I thank you, but what have you done lately?" "Well, that's kind of what I'm here for. How would you like to join our team?" "A team of what?" "Cryptid hunters." I looked at him with sheer disbelief. Pass. You haven't even heard. I don't want anything to do with that thing," I said, walking into the kitchen. "But you're the only one who's ever survived an attack." I wondered to myself if that was true or if he was just trying to make my pride force me into a bad decision. "Pass," I said. "You wouldn't be going alone," he said, getting up and following me to the kitchen. "There are 2 other cryptid hunters that would be along, plus me." "Not interested," I said. "There's a reward for its capture, and you would get a share of it." "No deal," I said, starting up the stairs. He seemed flustered. "You would get to carry a big gun," he said. I paused halfway. "How big of a gun?" "Big." I thought about it for a long moment. "All right," I said, and then continued up the stairs. "Great, then let's go." I paused. "What do you mean let's go, like right now? I just got back home." "We need to strike while the trail is fresh." "Fresh? A week old is fresh," he shrugged. "The guys and your equipment are in the truck. Can I at least grab a shower first?" There was an odd look in his eye. "No need, we'll be out on the trail." We stood in a silent stare down for a long moment, and then I shrugged and came back down the steps. "So how much money will I be making?" I said. He smiled. "Enough." I followed him outside, turning at the last moment to lock my front door that had seen better days, and it looked like a stiff breeze would blow it over. He grinned but said nothing as we approached the truck and climbed in the back doors. The two men in the front merely nodded when we got in, and then the driver started the truck and drove away toward the woods. I wasn't having pleasant memory flashbacks when we pulled into the same trailhead that I had barely escaped from just over a week ago. I had to wonder if I had had some head trauma they hadn't noticed at the hospital, or if Mr. Three-letter government agency had drugged me without my knowledge to get me to come back out here. I was tempted to run as soon as I opened the door, but I didn't want to look like a coward in front of these guys, even though I didn't know them from Adam, and they each had a good 50 pounds of pure muscle on me. We stepped around to the back, and Mr. Three handed me a backpack that was so heavy it nearly pulled me over. "You're gonna be good with that," he said, noticing my struggle. "You can take some stuff out if you want." "Nope, I'm good," I said, hefting it onto my back and somehow managing to keep it there without my knees buckling under the weight. Next, he handed me a belt that had all kinds of stuff on it, including the big gun. It was a revolver, but the cylinder was so long I wondered if it would shoot rifle shells. "Just remember, we're trying to capture it, not kill it." "That was never a part of the deal," I said. "It is if you want the big payday." I stopped in front of him. "What if I want revenge?" He looked me up and down, sizing me up as if seeing me for the first time. "Well, then you should go home and leave the hunting to us," he said, and then stepped around me and started down the trail. The second hunter followed him, but the third stayed behind him and stared at me. "Aren't you following them?" I said. "I'm the rear guard. I go last and watch everybody else's back." "So you're waiting to see if I follow them or tuck my tail between my legs and slink home?" Pretty much." I looked from the trail to the road and back again, and then slumped my shoulders and started down the trail. "So, what do I call you?" I said over my shoulder to the hunter beside me. He was silent for a moment and then softly said, "You can call me Ray." My mind shot back to an old comedy routine that I had seen on one of those classic TV shows. "Alright, Ray, I guess it's gonna be you and me for a while, because I know I won't be catching up to them with what feels like a Buick strapped to my back." "You told you to take out whatever you felt you didn't need. You ever heard of this thing called pride, Ray?" He shook his head ruefully. "Unfortunately, yes. Does that mean I can count on you to continue to make stupid decisions?" I stopped and turned to him. "I think the answer is obvious." "Great," he said with no small amount of sarcasm. We started down the trail, and I must say I did pretty well for around a half hour. And when I say pretty well, I mean trudging, heaving, and moaning at the incredible amount of weight on my back as we slowly followed the trail through the forest. To make things worse, it started to drizzle out. It didn't take too long for him to have. "Enough," he said. "Just stop right here." I obeyed and nearly fell over backward as gravity grabbed the backpack and tried to hurl it to the ground. If it wouldn't have been for Ray catching me, I would have hit the ground hard and rolled around like a helpless turtle, unable to get up on my own. He lifted the pack off my back effortlessly and set it on the ground. He dug through it and started thrusting things toward me. "Here," he said, shoving a handful of granola bars toward me. "Put these in your pants pockets." Next, he handed me a flashlight and some extra rounds of ammo, a water bottle, and a rain poncho. I took the poncho out of its wrapper and put it on. The first few steps I took sounded like I was wearing a snowsuit. Everything that he had given me to stow in my pockets made some kind of noise. The granola bar wrappers rubbed together. The rounds of ammo clinked and clicked. Even the rain poncho made noise when I took a step. "I thought we were trying to sneak up on this thing," I said, stopping in my tracks. "I sound like a freaking one-man band." "Don't worry about it," he said, avoiding my eyes as he set the pack off to the side of the trail and stepped past me. "I'm sure the rain will cover your sounds." I looked up and only a few drops landed on my cheeks. The rest was just a fine mist. Narrowing my eyes, I watched as Ray walked ahead of me on the trail. I hadn't known him for long, but it was easy to see that he was hiding something. Maybe he didn't want to scare me so I would keep on with the search. In any case, I rested my hand on the gun in its holster for comfort. "Don't go pulling that out unless you have to," I said without looking back. "Remember, we're here to capture, not kill it." "Maybe you are," I said. He stopped dead in his tracks and turned toward me. "Look, I get it, you're scared. I would be too if this was the first time that I was hunting something like this. But you have to do things our way so nobody gets hurt, you understand?" He hadn't said it in a threatening way, just a matter of fact, but I still found myself taking a step back. What if that thing decides it wants to hurt someone? He looked me in the eyes. "Well, then we stop it," he said. And then he turned and started down the trail, not even checking to see if I was following. I sighed and fell in step behind him, finding it much easier now without the heavy pack of doom weighing me down. I still rested my hand on the gun as we walked, though. The forest was quiet, the animals weren't making much noise, and the wind was still. I didn't know if it was the intensifying rain or something else that seemed to spook them. "Ray," I heard someone whisper. He stopped and whipped around on me. "What?" he said, looking at me. I didn't say anything. His eyes were full of suspicion, but he continued along the trail. It wasn't long until we heard the sound again. "Ray." His eyes instantly shot to me, but I held up my hands in surrender and shook my head. He scanned the trees, looking for where the voice had come from when we had heard it again. This time he was able to focus in on where it had come from. He started toward it without a second glance at me. "Wait a minute. Are you sure you want to follow this?" I whispered. "Of course," he said, but his eyes had an otherworldly quality to them, like he had been hypnotized or somehow was under the voice's spell. He stepped forward slowly but not carefully. It was as if he were being drawn and started walking into the woods in front of me. He had almost disappeared when suddenly the creature appeared as huge and real as ever. Its skin was burned all over its body and hanging loosely in some places, like it was about to fall off. It was much more terrifying than the last time that I had seen it. Even the hide of the other animal that it wore as its shawl seemed melted to its shoulders. It slashed Ray across the throat in one lightning-fast motion. All I saw was a spray of red before the creature picked Ray up and started off into the woods. Before I knew what was happening, my gun was in my hand and I was firing it over and over at the beast as it escaped with its prize. I fired the gun empty but kept squeezing the trigger on empty cylinders. Finally, I realized I wasn't shooting anymore and emptied the shell casings out, digging into my pocket to reload and dropping bullets in my haste. Once I finally had it reloaded, I slammed the cylinder shut and looked for the creature. To my surprise, 2 trees came toward me. I aimed the shaking gun toward them when one of them said, "Stop, don't shoot us." It was so shocking to hear a tree talk that I obeyed its command. They continued to advance on me when they stopped a few feet away, and one of them ripped its top off, revealing a human head. It was the agent. "Give me that gun," he said with an outstretched branch. "Absolutely not," I said, holding it away from him like a kid withholding a toy from a parent. "Where have you two been?" The other agent removed his tree top as well. "We were staking out the area. You two were supposed to bring it to us so that we could capture it." "Bring it to you? How were we supposed to do that?" He stared at me for a long time, looking as though he wasn't sure of what to say. I finally got it. "You used me as bait. You know, once that thing got my scent, it would follow me." He shrugged. "It was as good a plan as any. Except it caught on to your little plan and now Ray is in harm's way and it could already be dead." "What do you mean dead?" he said. I described him being taken with a special emphasis on the blood spray. He stared at me silently. "We need to regroup and think of what to do next." "What to do next is to find this thing and put as many holes in it as possible before it has Ray for an afternoon snack," I said, holding up the gun for emphasis. "I told you that we're bringing it in alive." even at the cost of our lives, I said, looking from one agent to the other. My point seemed to sink in grudgingly with both of them. We still need to find it, the head agent said. After we find it, we can debate killing it or not. Fine, this way, I said, starting in the same direction I had seen the creature and Ray disappear. Who died and made you boss? He said, following as quickly as his tree outfit would let him. I turned and faced him, as serious as a heart attack. Hopefully not Ray, I said, and then turned and resumed in the direction that I had seen them. I didn't turn back to see if they were following, but I could hear trees rustling behind me. I hoped that was them or I was in trouble. As we walked, my senses were on alert, watching and listening for the creature in hopes that it wouldn't pull another sneak attack. Thinking back to the brief battle, I wondered how many of my 6 shots hit the beast and how many might have hit Ray. I couldn't be that careless in the upcoming fight. I would have to take a better aim and be patient. Not only was there Ray to think of as a potential victim, but also the 2 clowns behind me dressed up as trees. We weren't on any trail, and that made it rough going for me. My legs were still sensitive, and I had rushed out of the house in just a pair of shorts and a Metallica t-shirt. The rain poncho that I wore gave a little warmth, but not as much as I would have liked. When we left, it was nice out, with the temperature in the mid-70s, but once the rain had started, it had dropped 10 degrees. That plus the fact that we were walking through rough country, avoiding thorns and all kinds of plants that seemed like they were designed just for the annoyance factor. I can't imagine how those 2 behind me were doing in their ridiculous tree outfits. I turned to check on them, but they were gone. Slowly looking around the forest, I searched for them, but they were nowhere to be found. With their outfits on, they could have been right beside me and I wouldn't know it. And they also admitted to using me as bait. Maybe that's what they were doing again. I wish that I would have just stayed home and ordered a pizza and watched Wipeout on TV, and then fallen asleep on the couch. That would have been a good first day home from the hospital. Instead, I was freezing in the middle of the woods all alone. And I had lost which direction I was going, so now I was officially lost in the woods too. Great. The rain was coming down harder now, and I decided to look for some kind of shelter and to regroup. I walked forward, looking not for the creature but anything that I could use to hide from the rain. A cave would be great as long as nothing was in it. A fallen tree that I could sit under would do as well. In the end, I lucked out. I hadn't gone far when a cave had appeared up ahead. Instead of blundering inside, I circled around and watched the entrance for a while, until I was cold enough to ignore the potential danger and get out of the rain. Standing in the mouth of the cave helped a little by getting me out of the rain, but I was still freezing. I turned and looked inside. The huge maw of blackness stared back out. Even using my flashlight didn't tell me much about my impromptu rest stop. Hanging out near the entrance was not advised. I would have to find someplace else once the rain had stopped. But as I looked up, a flash of light, followed soon by a crash of thunder that made the world shake, told me the rain wasn't about to let up. As cold as I was, it would take a special kind of crazy to go exploring this cave that could hold any number of wild animals who had no problem eating humans. I hoped one of them wouldn't be the creature. What did the agent call it? A Wendigo. Against every survival instinct, I shone my light into the cave and started walking. It was big, at least 12 feet from the ceiling, but the walls were smooth, almost like it had been dug with a machine. And there weren't a lot of rocks and debris like you would envision in a cave. It seemed like somebody had made this cave and concealed it as natural. But why? There was nothing out there in the middle of the woods. Even the cave itself was far off the beaten path. As I was wondering about the nature of the cave, I heard a sound behind me. Slowly I turned, hoping that the creature hadn't snuck up behind me like it did with Ray. But all I saw were 2 trees standing on either side of the cave. You've got to be kidding me. Like no one's going to notice 2 trees suddenly growing in the middle of a cave with no sunlight. Neither tree moved, but I was sure one of them made a shushing sound. I shook my head and continued into the cave. The further I went, the more the flashlight struggled to ward off the dark. It was like the light was overwhelmed by the darkness. As big as the cave was, I came to a spot where it opened up into a larger room. The ceiling was so far up it was hard for the flashlight to reach. As I scanned around the room with the light, I settled on something over in the corner. The closer I got to it, the more I wanted to turn around and leave. I stepped up right beside it and pulled my shirt collar up over my nose to cover the stench of death and decay. It was Ray, or what was left of him, strung up on a rack. Both his legs were gone, and the huge puddle of blood under him didn't give me hope that he had survived. I reached up and felt for a pulse anyway. My hand went right into the opening where the creature had slashed his neck. There was no pulse. At least I didn't see any bullet holes in him. That made me feel a little better. I hung my head and turned to report to the trees following me when I saw a sight that made me question reality. The creature had returned. It was in a life-and-death battle with a tree. It had picked the tree up and was holding it near the top. The tree was kicking and punching the creature as though its life depended on it. The creature seemed confused at first, but once the tree delivered a well-placed kick, the creature decided that it had had enough. I swung the tree around effortlessly like a baseball bat and smashed it into a wall. The sickening crunching sound it made on impact were a combination of wood and bone breaking. The tree instantly went limp, but the creature wanted to make sure. It threw the tree at the other wall, leaving a red splotch on impact before collapsing to the ground. The second tree hadn't moved the entire time. The creature stepped close to it, suddenly suspicious. It reached out when I made my decision to act. I pulled out the gun, aimed at the creature's head, and squeezed the trigger. I had never fired a .44 Magnum in a cave before, and I never will again. My ears were ringing so bad that I couldn't hear anything. I saw the tree holding its ears as well as the Wendigo. Its mouth was open, and I imagined it was screaming, but I couldn't hear it. I don't know what happened. If something in me just snapped or I realized that I was about to end up like Ray, I ran up to the Wendigo while it was disoriented by the gunshot, stuck the gun under its chin near its neck, and squeezed the trigger 5 more times. The top of its head exploded with a geyser of bone and red. It screamed so loud that even I heard it through my hopefully temporary deafness. I didn't hang around to see what was going to happen. I ran toward the cave entrance, grabbing the uninjured tree and pulling him out with me. It only took a moment for the tree to get the point and run along. Once out, he guided me back to the trail and took the top of his tree disguise off to talk to me. "I told you I wanted that thing alive," he said, looking and sounding very unhappy. "Why don't you tell Ray and the other agent that you just lost how that thing's life was more important than theirs?" He glared at me. "Oh, don't give me that look. I just shot a Wendigo at point-blank range. You think your little glare is going to frighten me?" He continued to glare. "Okay, you have 2 choices here," I said. "Either drive me home or give me your keys." He finally allowed his shoulders to relax and started walking. "I'm not giving you my keys," he muttered. We walked back out in silence. Whatever his deal was with bringing the creature in alive, he was serious about it. I was just glad the whole ordeal was over. "Do you think it's dead?" I said. He ignored me for a few minutes and then finally said, "I don't know, I've heard some amazing stories about how they recuperate." "Wow, gee, thanks, I feel so much safer now," I said as we rounded a corner, and there standing in the middle of the trail was a huge bear. We both froze. "What do we do?" "Shut up," he said back. We stood as still as humanly possible as the bear sniffed the air and lumbered up to us. For some reason it looked familiar. Could it possibly be the same bear that fought with the Wendigo over a week ago? It had some scars and scratch marks on it that looked partially healed. It stepped up to the agent and stared at him. Perhaps it had never seen a tree partially eat a human before. That's what he looked like with the top of the outfit off. Like the tree had half digested a human the way a snake devours its prey. And then it stepped over and sniffed me. Its eyes grew wide with what I would almost call fear. But that couldn't be right now, could it? I mean, why would a bear be afraid of me? It turned tail and ran off into the woods without looking back. What was that all about? I said. Do you really want to question it, or do you just want to get out of here? Get out of here, I said, my feet already double timing it down the trail. We were within sight of the car before we slowed down. Both of us were breathing hard from power walking the entire way. I was sure that it couldn't have been easy for him in that tree suit. I think I may have figured it out, he said as we arrived at the car and he fished out his keys. Do tell, O wise one, I said. It smelled the Wendigo's blood on you. What difference does that make? Think about it. If you're enough of an alpha to have Wendigo blood on you, the bear probably didn't want to mess with you. I thought about it and it made sense in a way. Just as we were about to leave, we heard an inhuman shriek off in the distance. He turned to me with a gleam in his eyes. Oh no, I said. You take me home right now that I don't care if you go try to hunt this thing down and end up getting eaten. All right, he said, pouting. We drove in silence, each of us in our own world of thoughts. Every once in a while, I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror just to be sure. When we arrived at my house, I got out and turned to leave and then stopped. Why was that cave man-made? I said. What makes you think it was man-made? He said with a nervous chuckle. Well, the walls and ceiling were too smooth. They seemed rough enough to me. So you're not going to tell me that there was a secret military base nearby? You enjoy your recuperation, sir, he said, handing me a business card. If you ever have problems like this again, give me a call. I dropped the card on the seat. I think I'd be better off on my own. You don't protect your partners very well. I walked inside my house without looking back. I woke up and started my day with a brisk, cold shower. My feet traversed the oak staircase, down to the kitchen, where I only had time to scrounge together some eggs, and then I headed to work. I got off my shift at 5 p.m., and then I made my way to get something to eat from Chick-fil-A. I got a chicken sandwich and a milkshake, and then I made my way home after that. I got home and I let my dog out. I got out some leftovers from the other night to make dinner, and I loaded up my PC. I play a lot of video games to relax. I basically play in my free time, like before I go to bed. The next day, I only got called into work for a couple of hours, which was nice, because I was super tired. After I got home, I went up to my room to play some guitar, and just jam out for a little bit. I got pretty bored of that soon, so I just turned on my Xbox in the living room and put my feet up to play my favorite game for a little while. It was getting pretty late by this point, so I threw a Netflix show on to fall asleep watching. It was around midnight at this point and I was pretty sleepy. I think I dozed off pretty soon after that. But I was woken up a little while later by some type of sound. I couldn't make out exactly what it was because I was half asleep, but it definitely woke me up. It was pretty loud and I thought it came from out front of my house. It was pretty dang close anyway. It was like a light, high-pitched sound. Almost like someone was playing a violin with a piece of rusty scrap metal outside of my window. I didn't really think much of it at the time. I was half asleep and I didn't really care at the time, so I just went back to sleep. I woke up at around 11 in the morning, and I felt like absolute crap. I felt like I was hungover, which was odd because I had had nothing to drink the night before. I had a horrible headache, and a slight ringing in my ear. I went to the medicine cabinet, grabbed 2 Tylenol out of the bottle and took them. A little while after that, My headache started to calm down, and the ringing eventually stopped. I had to have had 2 cups of coffee at this point, not only because I felt awful, because I'm definitely a coffee addict. There's no doubt about it. I'm a total caffeine fiend, because it really helps my focus. Thankfully, I wasn't scheduled to work until later that day, but I was going to see how I felt about working later. I was mostly waiting to see if I was even up for it. Something about that day felt off, as if some presence was watching my routines as a play upon a stage. I was alone, except for Gracie, but it felt like I was being watched. I was restless, and I just didn't want to be in the house anymore. I thought that maybe it was because I wasn't feeling good earlier, so I thought maybe some fresh air would do me some good. I got my dog's leash and loaded us up in the car, and took my Gracie for a walk to the park. I thought once I got back, I would feel better from just getting some fresh air. We walked in the park for almost an hour, and while I was there, I discovered something strange. I was walking Gracie on a path in the woods which I hadn't tread recently, but I could remember taking it in the near-distant past. All of a sudden, my dog started freaking out and growling to the left of me. I looked over to see what she was barking at, but I couldn't see anything. It was totally out of character for her, as I had never seen her act so defensively before. I was sure that she had definitely either seen or could sense something out there that I couldn't. This piqued my curiosity, so I decided to investigate. I walked off the path, letting her lead me. Gracie was pulling the leash so hard that I tripped a couple of times. She was choking herself, just trying to get there. I was walking for what seemed to be forever, until we finally got to where she had been leading me. It was in the middle of the woods, but above me was a huge, circular clearing in the trees, which was super random, because there were trees all around except in this one circle. On the ground, there was nothing but grass, but it was growing in a very weird way, in this almost hexagonal-shaped area. It didn't look very natural at all, and my dog was now ripping up the grass, digging for something. There was something under there, and she was going to find it. Everything that came next happened so fast. Gracie had dug up what looked like a bone. It was this dirty, yellowish white stick, and I grabbed it out of Gracie's mouth. I then examined it further, and then realized that maggots were festering inside, surely making a meal of whatever marrow was left. One even crawled onto my hand, and at that point I did my best Derek Jeter impression and threw the bone halfway across the field. I yelled at Gracie not to go after it. I then started jogging back to the path, where Gracie and I ran straight back to my car and drove home. I was just disgusted at what I saw, but I was also very curious about why there was a relatively large bone buried in the woods. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. I didn't get much sleep that night, because I was trying to understand it all. The odd circle in the middle of the woods with no trees in that one area. The bone that belonged to a large animal that was buried. I wanted to go back, and maybe do a little investigating so I could really see what was happening. It was around 1 in the morning at that time, and I heard a large whoosh come over my house, almost like an airplane flying over. You know how if you stand on the ground and a jet flies by, flying low? Well, that was the sound that came over my house. I was startled from brainstorming ideas of what could be out in the woods when the loud sound went over my house. I got right up without blinking an eye and I headed downstairs. I hopped in my car and I flew down my street towards the park. I was 2 streets away from the park at a stop sign when I saw something in the air above the woods. It looked large and black and I couldn't make out many details, but there was a light underneath, and it was shining down on something that I couldn't quite see. I quickly made my way towards it, trying to keep an eye on it while driving at the same time. Nobody was out this late at night, and the street was mostly dark with a few flickering streetlights. I parked my car in the park's parking lot and I got out. I didn't have much on me except for my phone, which I had in hand, and I turned the flashlight app on to see by. I was on the same path that I was on earlier, and all of a sudden, I started to hear this chanting. It almost sounded like some kind of ritual chant, like the kind those Gregorian monks do, but it sounded oddly pleasant. The chant almost sounded like a choir filled with beautiful voices. I didn't want to disturb whoever was making the sound, and I didn't know what else to do, so, forgetting why I was there in the first place, I started to head back. I had gotten back to my car when I saw that thing in the sky again. It was almost hovering over me for a second, and the next time that I looked back up at it, it just disappeared. It was there 1 second and gone the next. It was like something out of a movie, but this was real and right in front of my face. I hopped in my car and quickly sped off. I got to my house and I went right to my bed. I made sure all of my doors were locked first though, because I was pretty frightened. I had no idea what I had seen, so I tried forgetting about it and just falling asleep. I don't know how much sleep I got that night, but I woke up at around 1. Knowing I wouldn't be getting any more sleep anyway, I went online. I was researching the flying thing that I saw in the sky to see if anyone saw the same thing. I quickly realized that what I saw that night was a UFO. The way it acted and how it defied physics added up. It hovered without moving, and then flew away within microseconds. No man-made thing could do what that thing did. My brain then sparked to the second thing that I had witnessed. The chanting. I messaged a couple of my online buddies about what I saw, and they suggested that it was some type of cult. I told them about how I saw the circle in the middle of the woods and the hexagon-shaped grassy area, and they sent me this article on a nearby cult ritual that took place back in the 80s, where they had sacrificed a little boy. It was all over the paper back then, and whispered about around town. If you lived here, you would know about this story. There was speculation about if this cult was still functioning, or if it was even still around today. Most people thought that all the members had either died out or moved on. So I was sitting here thinking to myself about how I just found this strange cult that nobody knows about. Now I really wondered if the UFO was connected to this strange cult. I tried to go about my day like usual. I went grocery shopping and ran a couple of other errands. While I was out, I saw this really cool laser, which was green like the kind of tactical laser you use in the military. I got it for around $50, because I'm into that type of weird stuff. I wanted to use it the next time that I went out to explore the woods, and maybe to mess around with a couple of my neighbors. Nothing odd happened that week until Saturday. This was when I saw something that I never should have seen. It was Saturday night around 3 in the morning. The moon was full and the wackos were out. You know what they say about the full moon and the crazies? Well, tonight, that was the truth. I couldn't help myself but to explore the dark and spooky woods. I really wanted to know where that beautiful chant was coming from. The way I would describe it would almost be like a siren's calling. A siren is a mythical creature that would lure in unknowing sailors to their death by their enchanting song. It was like this, but a choir all in unison, together chanting the song. I still can't describe it in words, but I needed to find the source of it, and I was going to. So I was walking around on and off the path until I came across where I had witnessed it last. I saw a dimly lit flame far ahead of me in the woods. I couldn't make much out around it though, because of the trees and brush around me. I started to make my way over to it, watching my steps so I wouldn't alert anyone to my presence. If I was going to see what was happening, I would need to do it secretly and silently. I thought I knew what I was getting myself into when reading those articles online. This was a cult where they did rituals to someone, or something, for God knows what reason. I could feel my adrenaline start kicking in just to thinking about what I might see. For me, the danger just added to my excitement. It was like a key to my own personal door of blissfulness. I believe that once you aren't afraid of death and the unknown, then you can unlock the real joy of life. Some might say that I'm a thrill seeker, but I like to call it my addiction. When I'm in a situation that I shouldn't be in, I feel as if I am whole. I break through a threshold of right and wrong, and the reward is stimulation to my mind. It might sound a bit crazy to you, but aren't we all a bit crazy in some ways? Anyways, as I was creeping up on this fire, I saw multiple people around it. I ducked down in the brush trying to camouflage myself as best as I can. I was glad that I had thought to wear dark clothes that night. It really helped me to camouflage myself better in the dark woods. I started to listen to what these people were saying. I was probably 30 yards away at this point, and they began to chant that song, and it filled the air with this almost joyous feeling. I felt good just listening to it. It wasn't scary, and it didn't make me feel like I was in danger. I was just oddly at peace. I continued to watch to see what they were going to do next. They started to switch from the chant to a constant repetition of this one word, which seemed to be some type of possibly ancient language that I didn't recognize. They repeated this one word over and over again. I had no clue what would happen next, but then they doused the fire in gasoline, shooting embers up into the moonlit sky. All of a sudden, I remember seeing someone bring some type of squealing animal out. The creature had to be in pain because of the cries that this animal was making. They laid it on the ground and sprinkled it with some sort of dust while continuing the chanting. I saw one of the members take a large knife that was glowing red from the fire. He took the knife and sank it right into the animal's neck, spewing blood everywhere, as the poor thing cried out one last time. And then they took the lifeless corpse of the animal and threw it into the raging fire in the middle of the circle. It caught pretty quickly, and suddenly a putrid smell rushed my nose. It was the smell of rotten flesh before boiling. They had all begun to chant louder and louder, all rising up, stretching their arms and lifting their hands to the sky, while they were all reaching for something. I was in shock of what I just saw, but I wasn't scared. My adrenaline now was pumping so fast through my veins that I could feel it. I knew that I had to get out of there before the sunrise, which would be soon. It was almost 5 a.m. at this point. The sun would be coming up and revealing my position within the hour. Out of nowhere, they all stopped, and that made me nervous. It was dead quiet to the point where you could hear a pin drop. I heard distant birds chirping, and a couple crickets here and there. I then felt something slither across my leg. This made me jump a little, because I wasn't too fond of snakes, but I knew I still needed to remain calm. As I moved my leg, a branch cracked underneath me. At this point, it was still dead quiet, and I knew that someone had to have heard that. I looked up to where the ritual was taking place. I peeked my head over the brush and saw someone looking directly at me. And then, as if the rest of the world quit existing, it was me and this cult member eye to eye, about 30 yards apart. There were so many thoughts going through my mind at the time, but the one that stood out the most was, run. I stood up and with my adrenaline pumped legs, ran as fast as I could back to the path. I was pretty muddy from laying down in the dirt for the last hour and I looked like crap. I wanted to look back to see if anyone was chasing after me, but I was too focused on getting to my car and getting the heck out of the park. I got back to my car, clicking the unlock button on my keys multiple times before it opened, and finally got in the driver's seat. I locked my doors and I turned the engine on. It was still fairly dark out at this time and my car lights were on. The lights were pointed right towards where I just ran from. It was foggy, but I could make out an abnormally tall man, with some type of mask on in the distance. The man was standing on the path holding something in his hands. I tried to make out what it was, and it looked like it could have been a baseball bat with nails in it. I put my car in reverse and sped out of there trying to make sense of what had just happened. The rest of the day I just sat on my bed thinking. I sat there for hours just trying to understand what I had saw. I knew that I saw a cult doing a ritual. I wondered what that man would have done to me if he ever caught up to me. Knowing me, despite the events that had happened that night, it wouldn't stop me from exploring even more. That was yesterday. I went to Walmart today and bought some motion-activated cameras and some other kinds of trail cameras, like the kind that hunters use. They take pictures every few minutes. They also have night vision too. All the videos and pictures that are taken on these cameras will be sent directly to my phone via an app. I plan on setting these cameras up where the ritual had happened. There's a chance that I'll get nothing back, because the cultist might go somewhere else. Otherwise, I plan to record them doing whatever it was that they were doing. Either way, I'm planning on setting these up later today while it is still light out, and I'll report back with what I get. Update. I just got back from setting everything up and everything is good to go. I can access the live feed from my cell phone, which is definitely going to come in handy. I also went back to where Gracie found that bone to see if I could find anything else. The last time I was there with my dog, I ran off in a hurry. While I was looking around, I found a piece of paper that was pretty ripped up laying on the ground. It was pinned down under a rock, so it wouldn't be blown away from the wind. I started to try and make out what was written on it. I could only make out a few sentences. Here's what it said. The blood of the little one is forever sacred. We bless our sacrifice with the ashes of our past. Unison is all and all is forever. At the end, there was some ancient language and I tried looking up what it meant. After a few Google searches, I discovered that it was in Greek, and it meant, Hail Leader, as in the one who they sacrificed to. I found it amusing that the language that they were using was Greek. I reasoned that this cult must stem all the way back to ancient Greece. It was around 9 p.m. now, and I was preparing myself for the night. Before I had left the woods, I made sure that when I walked in front of where I placed the cameras, that they would all take my picture. The cameras worked just like they should, with very high quality pictures. The only thing I was worried about was if it would be able to make out any pictures that were taken in the dark. There was a night vision mode on the camera, so I hope that it doesn't make the quality unbearable. I bought this one specific camera that had this really high-tech thermal lens. It takes a picture if it detects body heat, so nobody and nothing that is warm-blooded could pass by it without getting their picture taken. For what this whole situation is, I think I am prepared pretty well. I don't really have a plan B if something goes wrong, so I guess I'll keep this post saved on my computer. This way, if something bad happens to me, or I go missing, then whoever finds this will know what was happening at the time. I made myself some dinner, and put some Netflix on to make time go by faster until it was time to leave. I planned on leaving around 2 a.m., and to be near the park just watching the cameras on my phone. I was a decently patient person, so I could sit there for hours and wait until something happens. After watching a couple of episodes of my favorite show, I got up to go to the bathroom. My bathroom has a window that you can see my backyard from. I was just doing my business when I thought I heard something rustling around out back. I peeked through the blinds from my bathroom and I didn't see anyone. I washed my hands and I headed downstairs to turn the outside lights on. I had a way better angle now to view the whole backyard. I turned the lights on, but I didn't see anything then either. I started to chalk it up to my mind just playing dumb tricks on me, because of what I would be doing that night. I turned the lights back off, and all of a sudden, I could see this shadowy figure that was far back at the edge of my fence. It was just standing there, apparently doing nothing. I closed my eyes, holding them shut for a long moment before I opened them again, because maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. When I opened my eyes again, it was still there. The figure was solid black and unusually tall. I would say that it had to be at least 7 feet tall. I turned my lights back on and it instantly disappeared. It was almost 1 a.m. at this point, but I felt compelled to leave early. I made sure all of my doors were locked and I headed to my car. Tonight was just getting started. I got into my car, put my keys in the ignition, started the engine, and I pulled out to my driveway. I headed to the parking lot of a closed coffee shop that was nearby to the woods. I turned my car off and plugged my phone in to charge it. I loaded up the camera app to see what was currently going on, and there was nothing. What a surprise, I thought. I'm not too sure how long I waited, but it had to have been a few hours before something caught my interest. A notification popped up saying, "Camera 1 has activity. Click here for details." I clicked the notification and I pulled the feed up. I couldn't make anything out, so I turned the night vision mode on. As I turned this mode on, I could see to the far left of the screen 2 tiny, glowing eyes. I tried zooming in, but it wouldn't let me. I swiped over to my other cameras to try to make sense of what I was seeing. Camera 2 was the same, but now there was double the eyes. You know how a cat's eyes glow in the dark? Well, it was the same thing, but it had to have been 7 feet in the air. I went to my third camera and I could finally make out a person. They had to be wearing some kind of dark colored robe, because I couldn't make out any features on it. It also had that weird mask on. It appeared to be some type of animal skull with sticks coming out of it. This thing was wearing an animal skull on its head. And then I remembered I had my thermal camera. I quickly pulled up the video feed and clicked the scan area option. This was the oddest thing, because it should have lit up like a Christmas tree in shades of red. But it was actually quite the opposite. These things were as cold as ice. No high temperature was recorded. I only knew where they were because their bodies were outlined in the cool blue color for temperatures 40 degrees and below. As I was focusing on this, something else caught my eye. The temperature meter lit up in the middle of the circle. It was the fire, and the temperature meter was the highest that it could get. The ritual was beginning. This didn't make any sense at all. If they were human, it would be reading above 98 degrees, but these things in dark robes were colder than ice. The meter doesn't read below 40 degrees, so I only can assume they had ice water for blood. I looked at the clock and saw that it was 4 a.m., and shit was now getting real. My curiosity was beyond peaked at this point. And then out of nowhere, something lit up the camera with a bright light. I couldn't see anything but this large, super bright light. I switched over to my thermal camera to see what it was reading. Above 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This was some crazy stuff. The huge light, which I still have no clue as to where it came from, was hotter than that fire. I had only been looking at this light for a minute when I started to get error warnings from the apps. The error is red. Camera non-functional. Please reset. I was really curious now that all my cameras weren't working because of the heat. This huge ass light from the sky melted my cameras, and somehow these people are still alive. This was impossible. It had to be a mistake of some kind. An equipment malfunction of some kind maybe. Because if this light was hotter than the fire, then shouldn't it kill those things? I was on my way over to the park and that's when it hit me. The light was from that UFO I saw earlier in the week. That was the only explanation that I could come up with. I had just gotten to the park and I parked my car in the lot. I felt the adrenaline starting to slowly course its way through my body. I was moments away from seeing what was going on in the middle of the woods. I was walking on the path, and I slowly began to see this very bright, exposing light. It looked like a spotlight, but was shining directly in my face. I was so fascinated and curious as hell to see what it was. It was still hovering over where the ritual was taking place. I crept my way down into the brush and that's when I saw him. He was wearing this dark, raggy looking robe, that large animal skull mask on his head, and his bright blue piercing eyes. When I tell you those eyes stared through your soul, I mean it. It was obvious to me that these cult members weren't human. The way they did everything so in unison without missing a beat. The way they walked with their long legs. Most of the members were at least 7 feet tall or so. The tallest one was probably 8 feet, with these long, inhuman arms. The way they stretched and morphed was unnerving. I saw him bend down and it almost looked like he broke his arm, and then snapped it back into place without flinching. I found all of this absolutely fascinating. Every bit of it pumped more adrenaline through my veins and into my brain. I was feeling amazing but also killer focused. I was now on a task to get a picture of this UFO. I took my phone out and I brought the camera app up. I didn't blink once and I zoomed in on the light. The dang light was so bright it wouldn't focus for 1 second. I held the focus to sustain it, and it started to clear at this point when I saw him. He looked over towards me and didn't move. He just stood there without breathing, staring at me. This thing, this monstrosity, not even 20 feet away from me, was staring through me with those piercing blue, unnatural eyes. I had no clue what to do at this point, so I took the picture and I bolted. When I thought that I couldn't have ran faster, I was overcome by my fight-or-flight instinct of, I know I'm going to die, and I ran faster than ever. I began to hear multiple voices of them yelling in this deep, ancient dialect. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. I was running on the path at this point when I felt this horrible stomach cramp. The cramp was accompanied by that familiar piercing headache and a dull ringing in my ears. My survival instincts kicked into overdrive, screaming at me to get to my car. A few blurry moments later and I got back to the parking lot. I already had unlocked my car, so I jumped in and turned my engine on faster than I ever had before. I got out of there, leaving skid marks behind me, and then while I was driving down the road, I felt an intense sense of relief and safety. I was safe. For now at least. But that is it, isn't it? I have no clue whether or not I'll be alive in the next few days. I've decided to put my house up for sale and legally change my name. I've already quit my job, and I'm ready to leave this crappy town behind. I'll be posting this document of my experience with this cult. I just hope they don't find me. Or maybe they already have. The reason I say that is because I've had some weird stuff happen to me recently. While I was going to my local grocery store the other day, I saw something strange. I was coming out of the store while looking at my phone, and all of a sudden, it was a notification from the camera app. You see, I obviously never went back there. I thought that the notification had to be a glitch, since I knew the dang cameras were all apparently destroyed. It said, "Camera 1 has activity. Click here for details." I clicked on it, and what I saw shocked me. It was a child, all alone with only a hat on his head. And then one of those things wearing a dark robe came over, blocking the camera's view. I couldn't see what was happening, because he was standing in front of it at this point. My stomach sank just thinking about what I was about to witness, but then it just went black. The screen cut out and that dang message popped up. "Camera non-functional. Please reset." What happened next is why I'm leaving town and never coming back. I began to feel this weight fall over my chest, like an elephant was sitting on me. And then that ringing in my ear started, just like the night I ran away from that thing. I then saw my phone start to glitch out, and it started to get extremely hot. I mean like when you leave it in the sun all day hot. It began giving a message saying, "High temperature alert. Please let phone cool before using again." I almost couldn't hold it because it was so hot. I just put it in my pocket thinking, hoping it was all a stupid glitch. And then my phone began playing a song at full volume. It was the beautiful song that the cult members were chanting in the woods. I neither had made a recording of their chant, nor did I find it anywhere on the web. My phone had accessed this audio from some external source, but only God knows where it came from. This is what made me tip. This was the last straw for me, and I was no longer curious about this messed up ancient extraterrestrial cult. I shut my phone off and I threw it in the grocery store trash can. I'm writing all of this on my new phone while sitting on a plane awaiting takeoff. I got a solid cash offer on my house, and we settled on a very lush price, so Gracie and I are gone. I'll probably wind up somewhere in Europe. Maybe I'll own a business, like a vineyard off of the Bay of Naples. Maybe I'll find something in the Maldives Islands right off the coast of India. I will tell you this much, whoever may be reading this. I'm about to fly somewhere where I can hopefully begin a new life without this constant fear of these inhuman things that are lurking in your town. I saw something that I shouldn't have seen, and maybe went too far exploring it. I've experienced a lot in my life and I don't care what people say. I know I'm not in control of what happens next, and I've already accepted it. I'll either eventually live out my life somewhere nice and warm, or these supernatural things will find me and end my life one day. I wish I still had that picture I had taken as proof, but the light had melted the camera lens on my now discarded previous phone, and the picture had ended up as a distorted mess anyway. I don't know how they might end me, or what they might do to me. I just hope this message, this warning, gets out to the public. There are otherworldly things out there, whether or not you believe it. It's real and I have seen it with my own eyes. Goodbye now, and wish me luck on wherever I wind up going. Remember to be safe out there, and live life to its fullest, because you never know what could be out there, just waiting for you.